Today, may I kindly ask you for a very small favor? If you could join us online on our Facebook page. So it could either be the PSC page, Facebook page, the Council for Humanitarian Networking of Sheikhul Islam official page, and also the Institute of Asian Study Facebook page. Could you please help us share the Facebook live video that we will be putting up? And also we have the Ummati YouTube channel as well. If you could spread the words and help us share it on our social media. And then very shortly, hopefully, we will begin with today's symposium. Thank you very much for joining us here today. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, respected speakers, faculty members, students, and friends. Thank you for joining us here today. And on behalf of the organizing committee, it is my great honor to welcome you to the symposium commemorating the Nakba Day 2026, entitled The Greater Israel Vision, Implications for Palestinian Well-Being, Regional Stability, and the Global Order. My name is Zinat Mohammed, and it is a great honor to be your Masters of Ceremony today. We are gathered here at Chulalongkorn University at a time when conversations surrounding Palestine are no longer distant geopolitical discussions, but a humanitarian and ethical and global concern that continues to shape our collective future. Today's symposium aims not only to deepen the understanding, but also to encourage a meaningful dialogue, critical reflection, and international civic engagement. Before we begin, for guests requiring translation, please prepare your internet-connected device and earphones to access the Zoom translation room. And now, to officially commence today's program, it is my great pleasure to invite the Chair of the Organizing Committee, Associate Professor Dr. Adisara Gatib, Chair of PSC Thailand, to deliver the welcome address. Please welcome Dr. Adisara.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished guest speakers, Professor Ilan Pappé, Dr. Atitongin, esteemed colleagues, students, members of the press, good afternoon and a very warm welcome to Chulalongkorn University. On behalf of the organizing committee, it is my honor to welcome you to Chulalongkorn University. This symposium is a collective effort between the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, or PSC Thailand, the Council for Humanitarian Networking, and the Muslim Studies Center at Chulalongkorn University. We stand together today to affirm that academic responsibility and civic engagement are inseparable from the pursuit of justice. We met to commemorate the Nakba, not as a static historical date, but as an ongoing process of displacement and dispossession. For over 2 years, the scale of destruction in Gaza has moved beyond conventional warfare, when entire bloodlines are erased and thousands of families are reduced to a single survivor. We are no longer discussing a conflict. We are witnessing a systematic campaign of ethnic cleansing and genocide as defined by international law. I want to give you an example here. This is my personal experience. 2 years ago, when we were protesting in front of the Israeli embassy in April 2024, on the Nakba day, okay, I was there as well. Okay, and I saw one of the poster by one of the activists. Okay, and our photographer captured this picture, and I want to show you because it was very poignant at the time when I saw the poster. Here it is. May I read? In Thailand, flour costs 37 baht per bag. In Gaza, flour can cost you your life. You still remember this incident? What is it called? The Flour Massacre, happening in February 2024. Okay, so it was very poignant for me, so I thought I would like to show you this today because it's kind of personal to me. We need to The focus of this symposium is the Greater Israel vision. What was once dismissed as fringe rhetoric is now an unfolding reality driven by a policy of expansion through exclusion. From the uninhabitable ruins of Gaza and the stolen farmlands of the West Bank to the intensified operations in southern Lebanon and the illegal annexation of the Golan Heights, the evidence is undeniable. These are not isolated military actions. They are the proactive execution of a territorial expansionist ideology. This vision, which seeks to redraw the map of the Middle East, threatens the sovereignty of neighboring Arab nations and actually threatens people all around the world, I might say, and undermines the very sanctity of international law. Our objective today is to challenge the normalization of these policies. We have brought together esteemed voices, Professor Ilan Pappé, Dr. Atit Tong In, and our representative from Palestine, Voice from Palestine, to move beyond fragmented headlines and examine the ideological roots of this crisis. We are here today to provide a platform for evidence, to challenge complacency, and to demand accountability. The urgency of this symposium lies in a simple truth. If expansionist ideology or policies are allowed to supersede international law, the prospects for world peace are dismantled for everyone, everywhere. This is not merely a discussion, it is a call to awareness and a call to action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adisara, for such a moving opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my great privilege to introduce you to our keynote speaker for today. Professor Ilan Pappé is a world-renowned historian, political scientist, and leading figure among the new historians who have fundamentally reshaped our understanding of the 1948 Nakba. He is currently a professor of history at the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom, where he serves as the director of the European Centre for Palestine Studies. And throughout his career, he has been a courageous advocate for justice, receiving the Middle East Monitor's Lifetime Achievement Award in 2017. And he is also the author of over 20 influential books, including The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine and his most recent 2025 work, Israel on the Brink and the Eighth Revolution That Could Lead to Decolonization and Coexistence. I'm sure many of you have his published books with you guys today, and we will have a book signing session right after this. So it is now time for to deliver his address. So please welcome Professor Ilan Pappé on his address on the Promised Land as Political Project, Deconstructing the Myth of the Greater Israel Vision. Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause for Professor Ilan.
Thank you all for being here, and I do apologize for the delay due to the Bangkok traffic, which I'm sure you're all aware of. I'm very glad that I chose this year to commemorate the International Day of Nakba in Thailand. As you can imagine, there are so many places where historians like me who work on the Nakba for most of their professional life can be at. But my guess is that we need to spread our discussion about the Nakba to places where probably they are less talked about, less discussed, and which are as important to us in Palestine as places which are geographically or historically more connected to Palestine and the conflict there. So it's a great pleasure for me to share my thoughts with you here in Bangkok about the Nakba and about the theme that I was asked to talk about, the Greater Israel ideology or vision. Ideologies in general are a set of assumptions about reality that begin as a foundation for a political movement. And most of these assumptions remain intact by those who subscribe to that ideology, but the circumstances on the ground where you want to implement your ideology or your vision forces you to change, to adapt your ideology to the reality on the ground. But while keeping still loyal to the basic ideas that have led you in the first place to subscribe to a certain ideology. And this is true about Zionism as well. I think those of you who are familiar probably with public discussions where you are trying to explain to people that yes, the main problem in Israel today is the Netanyahu government and the particular political forces that are dominant in Israel. At the same time, especially when you think about the Nakba of 1948, you know that that particular crime against the Palestinian people was not committed by the political forces that today are dominant in Israel, but rather by what they would call in Israel the left. That is the labor movement that was the dominant part of the Zionist ideology, and they are the ones who committed the ethnic cleansing of 1948. So you can see a connection between an ideological elite that is very different in its way of looking at the world in 1948 and the one that has committed the crimes against the people of Gaza in the last 3 years. So we have to understand where is the ideology still in its fundamental essence, and what are the changes that occurred in the last 15 or 20 years that lead us to the kind of Zionism that we see today. So what is the connection between the policies today and the overall history of the Zionist project, and what is particular to this group of people that are now very decisive in determining Israeli policies inside and outside of Israel. What hasn't changed is the very essence of the Zionist project. This is still with us. The same challenges that the very idea of Zionism has brought with it when the ideology first appeared on the international scene, these same challenges are still with us today. You probably know that, but it's not a bad thing to return to the origins, to understand how it all started, and to see its relevance for today. Zionism began as a European project, as a solution for a European problem. The problem was that Europe, and especially Central and Eastern Europe, were unwilling to accept the European Jews as Europeans. You can call it anti-Semitism, you can call it hatred of Jews, you can call it racism. All these terms would be relevant to the fact that the millions of Jews who were part of Europe were not accepted as Europeans. And despite the modernization of Europe in the mid-19th century and late 19th century, the secularization of Europe, the advancement of the ideas of the Enlightenment, democracy, and nationalism, this problem remained an issue. And a coalition of a kind developed by people from different perspectives that eventually came to the idea that the best way of dealing with this racism, which to my mind was the wrong way, but at that time there were enough people who believed it was the right way, that the best way to deal with this particular racism is by indeed accepting that the Jews cannot be part of Europe, and yet they should be assisted by building a Europe outside of Europe, in Palestine. Put it in less soft terms, they should be allowed to colonize Palestine in order to help the Europeans to deal with their own racism. I'm sure today, if someone would have come to a group of people and said, what do you think about it objectively as a solution, they would say there's something terribly wrong with this idea. You are racist against your own people, and you think the only best way to deal with it is to allow them to colonize another country and dispossess its indigenous people. The reason that such an idea at the time looked reasonable was because this was the age of colonialism. was the age of imperialism, and quite a lot of the people who supported this idea of turning part of the Arab world, part of the Muslim world, that was still under Turkish Ottoman rule, into the solution of the European Jews. Part of this possibility of turning a very irrational idea into a logical political project was that the members of that coalition, each for their own reasons, thought that it would benefit their own interests. So who were the most important groups that made this possible? And you needed powerful groups to make it possible, because as I said, Palestine was not part of Europe. The vast majority of people in Palestine were Palestinians. Even the Jews who lived at the time in Palestine were Palestinians and did not see any connection to the Jews of Europe. So you needed a powerful coalition to change it. So on the one hand, you had fundamentalist Christians, evangelical Christians. They were very important in this coalition because some of them held high positions, such as prime ministers, ministers. One was even a president of the United States. They believed that what they called the return of the Jews to the Holy Land would precipitate the second coming of the Messiah, the resurrection of the dead, the beginning of the end of time in a positive way. And they showed great support for this idea. And as I said, some of them were powerful enough in their own countries to push for this to become not just a theological vision, but a proper political project. Another group were British imperialists. Britain already at that time controlled most of the world, and yet the territorial appetite to expand the British Empire did not end in the 19th century. And they could see those imperialists, especially those who wanted to expand the British Empire in London, could see here an opportunity to expand British influence into what was then still part of the Ottoman Empire. And therefore they supported the idea of solving the problem of the Jews in Europe by establishing a Jewish state in Palestine as something that would also enhance the British ambition to expand the empire. Not to mention the fact that some of them were anti-Semites, anti-Jewish themselves, and they understood that the pressure on the Jews in places such as Russia and Germany and so on might lead these Jews to come to Britain. It's not surprising that the most important person associated with this group of imperialists who made the possibility of turning an Arab country into a Jewish state, Lord Balfour, Arthur Balfour, was a British Foreign Secretary. It's not surprising that he's associated with both impulses. In 1906, he was the main person behind legislation that tried to stop Jewish immigration from Eastern Europe to Britain with an alien law, as it was called. He is the same person who gave the Balfour Declaration in 1917, giving British support for the idea of a Jewish state in Palestine. It's the same person who tried to stop Jews from coming to London and supporting Jews going from Europe to Palestine. A third group of people, which is very important, are those Jewish intellectuals and activists who really, one should say genuinely, were trying beforehand to see ways in which to persuade the Europeans to accept them as equals, and it failed. So they began to think, they internalized in many ways what the Europeans said about them. They said, they're probably right. We are not Europeans. We're a different race. We're a different nation. So they redefined the Jewish religion as nationalism. And everybody was defining everyone in nationalist terms in the second half of the 19th century. So there was nothing unique about it. So they got excited by the idea. What was so interesting, and this will bring us to the vision of Greater Israel later on in this century, what was interesting was not only that they had to turn a religion into nationalism, to take a theological idea and make it a secular ideology. That was not the only thing. They had to reinterpret Jewish learning and Jewish scriptures that were much more spiritual in nature into ideological scriptures, into political scriptures. This goes back to the early days of Judaism at the end of the Roman Empire. Up to the fall of the Jewish, or what should call it the Hebrew, kind of sovereign kingdoms under the Roman Empire, Judaism was kind of divided into two brands, I would call it. You had the Hebraic Judaism and the Rabbinical Judaism. The Hebraic Judaism was centered on the idea of the temple in Jerusalem and everything around it, and therefore it sounds very relevant to Israeli Jews today because it had all these features that later on in modern times you associate with state and sovereignty and nationalism. So that was the kind of idea that interpreted Judaism focusing on the land of Palestine, which led them to rebel against the Roman Empire and to lose, of course, given the power of the empire. They were in great conflict with another idea of Judaism, the Rabbinical Judaism, which saw the role of Judaism as focusing on learning, on teaching, on connecting to the world, trying to make the world a better place, and so on. And because of the very disastrous result of insisting of kind of political Judaism in the days of the Roman Empire, most of the Jews after that focused on Rabbinical Judaism. So the idea of being a Jew was to focus on learning, on teaching, on trying to improve the world. And that is the Judaism that existed when the idea of Zionism emerged in the late 19th century. So what these Jewish intellectuals did, they reconnected to the idea of the Hebraic Judaism. And they said actually it was wrong all these years to focus on learning and studying and living in the particular way that religious Jews lived. We have to go back to the Hebraic Judaism, which led them to claim, again, quite ironically, that actually Palestine belongs to the Jewish people. And they reread the Bible, they reread Jewish learning and so on, not anymore as spiritual material that allows you to define the relationship between the faithfuls and themselves and the faithful and God, but rather as a heavenly pledge, as a religious pledge to Jewish sovereignty in Palestine. I have to say that most of the great Jewish thinkers at the time that this idea emerged in the late 19th century totally rejected this interpretation. They said this has nothing to do with Judaism the way we understand it. Secondly, they understood that this was not just a way of redefining the religion, it was a way of getting out of the religion. They said, oh, actually what you are doing, and some of you are familiar with something I said many years ago, they were totally secular actually in their approach. What they wanted is to, because they defined Judaism as nationalism, is not to be religious Jews or better Jews. They wanted to use the religion in order to justify a secular project of colonialism in Palestine. This is why I always say that Zionism from the Jewish perspective was founded by people who did not believe in God, but believed that God gave them Palestine. And this is the kind of contradiction in the early Jewish ideas about Zionism that will come back to haunt the Israeli Jewish society later on, and I will come back to this in a moment. So this powerful coalition of evangelical Christians, British imperialists, and a willingness among important Jewish leaders in Europe brought up the idea that the best solution for everyone is for Britain to take over Palestine and build there a Jewish European state. Remember the reality on the ground when this idea is broadcast. The reality on the ground was that you have about 600,000 people living in that country, Palestine. 93% of them are Muslims. 90% are Muslims, 15% or more, 10% are Christians, a very small community of Jews. Most of them, Christians or Muslim or Jews, it doesn't matter, see themselves as part of Islamic civilization, part of the Ottoman Empire for centuries. None of them is being consulted, of course, about the idea of turning the country into a Jewish state. While all these ideas are being, prepared as a political program, first by the first Zionist Congress in Vienna in Basel, in Switzerland in 1897, then through the Balfour Declaration in 1917, and then with the support of the League of Nations after Palestine is being occupied by the British Army. In all this period, from the very early idea of turning Palestine into a Jewish state to the very practical steps to make it a reality, not one person in Palestine is being consulted to ask them. They are the indigenous people, they are the native people, they are the vast majority of the people. Not only that they are objectively are the people of the land, so to speak, they are already themselves are embroiled in the idea of nationalism. They're already thinking as well, like so many other people in the world at the time, of either becoming part of a united Arab national entity if the Turkish rule would come to an end. Some of them thought maybe they will be part of greater Syria, together with what today is Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine. Some of them wanted Palestine to be an independent nation in the future. It doesn't matter. They had their own ideas of how to move into the 20th century with the power of ideas such as nationalism, modernity, and yet very close connection to tradition, religion, and the history of the place. A very normal progression of people who lived in that part of the world in West Asia. And none of that is taken into consideration. It's quite incredible if you think about the Balfour Declaration that talks about the Palestinians in Palestine, who were the vast majority of the people, as the non-Jewish minority. Read the Balfour Declaration. He talks about the Palestinians as the non-Jewish minority whose rights, the Balfour Declaration hoped, would not be affected by the idea of establishing a national homeland for the Jews. This is the basis of, I think, of some of the major problems we are facing today, because there are two challenges that this idea brought that Israel was unable to solve until 2026. The first challenge was that however noble, and there's something noble on the impulse of saving Jews, especially after the Holocaust, those Jews and Christians who said Jews are under existential danger were right. Look what happened in the Holocaust. But this idea that the best way of dealing with this looming danger to the Jewish people would be best served by colonizing an indigenous Arab country proved to be a huge problem, because the people themselves did not accept to be colonized, but even worse than that, the people who colonized were not interested in living next door to the indigenous people. They wanted, in the age of settler colonialism, they wanted to displace the local people and replace them with their own group of people that they defined as the newly born Jewish nation, right? And it was very clear that the debate among Zionist leaders was not on the need to have as much as Palestine as possible with as few Palestinians in it as possible. That was not the debate. The debate was how best to do it, where a lot of Jews who were involved in leading the Zionist movement also wanted still to be loyal, and it was a genuine wish to be loyal to universal values such as democracy, liberalism, and socialism. And I think throughout the years what they find out that if you want to be loyal to liberal ideas, universal ideas, humanity or human rights and civil rights that become very important to many Jews, especially after the Holocaust, and at the same time you still wish to make Palestine a Jewish state, it's impossible to reconcile these two impulses, even if you are genuinely looking to reconcile. And I think that to understand Israel today, you really have to give them the credit that not all of them were cynical. They really wanted to do what I call, they wanted to be progressive ethnic cleansers. They wanted to be democratic occupiers. Those of you who know Hebrew know that the occupation of 67 was first described as an enlightened occupation, a kibush hanaor. This idea that we're not a usual occupier. We are bringing something good with the occupation, which is typical, by the way, to all colonial empires. You remember, probably are you familiar with the concept of the burden of the white man? That we are colonizing Africa, but we are doing it for the benefit of the Africans, bringing them civilization. So there was one challenge that was not solved. It was not solved because the only way of making Palestine a Jewish state was by force, by imposition. The whole concept of solving the European Jewish problem by creating a European Jewish state at the heart of the Arab world, at the heart of the Muslim world, was that it could only be done by enforcement, by coercion, by violence. Thank you. And it was very clear that in any case of colonialism, of settler colonialism, that the local population at a certain point would say enough is enough, and they will resist, and they will become an anti-colonialist movement. And then you go to this terrible cycle by which the violence of the resistance to being replaced and displaced is becoming the justification of more violence of the colonizer against the colonized. And you can see all around Israel's history, this idea of retaliation. We are violent not because we wanted to be violent, but because we have to respond to Palestinian violence. And that's what, when you try to explain to people the difference between symptoms of violence and the origin of violence. Like when you treat an illness, you cannot treat only the symptoms. You have to go to the source of the illness. So you have to start at the beginning to understand why there is a cycle of violence, and not to start where it's convenient for you to start the story. So that was a challenge that, as we know until today, Israel was unable to solve. And the idea that the more liberal Zionists and the labor Zionists who controlled Israel more or less until the 1970s, that somehow they will find a way out of it. Maybe they'll give up some of the territory. Maybe they will give more rights to the Palestinians. Maybe they will develop the idea of a two-state solution. All of this collapsed because in the end of the day, you cannot reconcile the idea of an ethnic racist state with ideas of democracy, equality, and peace. The second challenge was nothing to do with the Palestinians. This idea that Judaism is nationalism clashed with the idea of Judaism as religion. And for a while in Israel, you didn't feel that it's a problem because it was set aside because of what they called the security issue. So there was no need to find a common basis for those who were religious Jews and those who were secular Jews. But when, and that's what happened in this century, when the struggle between secular and religious Jew, or what does it mean to be a Jew in Israel in the 21st century, connected to the question, what should be the Israeli attitude to the Palestinians, you had a very dangerous mixture of nationalism and a very fundamentalist interpretation of Judaism. This is what happened in the 21st century. It happened before, but it was very much on the margin. What I mean by this is that a large number of Israeli Jews, especially a younger generation that grew up in the Jewish settlements in the West Bank, a third generation of Jews who came from the Arab world and never found themselves in the Israeli European Jewish society, and a lot of people who grew under the influence of ideologues of the more revisionist kind of Zionism of Jabotinsky and Menachem Begin and so on. Together, they dealt with the two challenges in the mixture that is now informing Israeli politics in the 21st century. They came to two conclusions. And as I say, when they did it already before in the 20th century, but nobody took them seriously because they were very marginal in Israeli politics, culture, and they seemed to be quite marginal and not important. One was the challenge of the Palestinians. They said very clearly, it's a terrible mistake to think that you should mix your policies towards the Palestinians with ideas of universalism, justice, international law, democracy, human rights, and civil rights. This is dangerous. It weakens us. It allows the Palestinians to exist in Palestine. We should dispense with this kind of idea that we need to reconcile our policy towards the Palestinians with our commitment to international law or democracy and so on. We don't need this. We have absolute right for the land, not just Israel, but for the whole land of Israel, that is the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and Israel before 67. In fact, many of them think that they have the right to Jordan as well, south of Lebanon as well, and south of Syria as well. We'll come back to that in a moment. And therefore, the only drive in our policies should be our understanding of what is our national interest. And our national interest is to have a totally Jewish Palestine. They had great success in 2018 when their ideology became the Israeli nationality law in 2018, passed by the Israeli Knesset as a fundamental law, that only the Jewish people are the nation that can exist between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean. If you would have thought about, in the 1960s, such an idea would never have even arrived in the Israeli Knesset, but now it became an Israeli law. So that's one way of dealing with the impossibility of the liberal Zionists to reconcile their wish for universal values and their settler colonial ideas of colonizing Palestine. The second challenge to Judaism, when they said all this idea of the secular Jews, that somehow you can even have this concept of being a secular Jew, is impossible and unacceptable. So they actually have a vision of a far more theocratic Jewish state. And they see a connection. They say the more religious, the more theocratic Israel will be, the more successful it will be in its fight against the Palestinians, against its enemies in the Arab world, and so on. So it goes together, the idea that you want to struggle against any manifestation of liberalism, pluralism, democracy in the Jewish society, and such a fight would benefit the possibility of creating in the future this greater Israel that would reflect the kind of Israel that they believed, which nobody can prove, but they believed existed before the time of the Romans, the kingdoms of David and Solomon. They even draw maps, although one cannot extract maps from the Bible, but they draw even maps, right? They read the Bible as a story of a Jewish kingdom, a Hebrew kingdom, that everybody was afraid of in the region. Everybody deferred to it. And they really believed that this is the vision of the future, that you need to deter the region in order to establish this kind of a future kingdom. They build models of the Third Temple in Jerusalem instead of Al-Aqsa. They build small movements for colonizing South Lebanon, South Syria, thinking about Jordan as well, and so on. As I say, if you went to Israel in the 1980s, people would be aware of these ideas, but they would tell you, and rightly so at that particular moment, these are the lunatic fringes of Israeli society. Don't take these people seriously. But what happened in 2020 or 22, but even before that, that suddenly these ideologies and their solution to the two challenges, what does it mean to be a Jew in Israel? And what does it mean to have a Jewish state in Palestine? That their ideas suddenly became the ideology of a very powerful political coalition inside Israel. Nobody saw it coming. Well, some people did, like myself. I wrote about it in 1999. But most people, I remember, rejected I wrote an article in 1999, and I gave a lecture in the University of Beersheba, and I said to them, you know, whatever I think about you, and you know I don't think very good things about you, your Zionism 2.0 is far more frightening and far more destructive, both to you, to the Palestinians, and to the region. And I was ridiculed at my lecture. I remember people said, you have no idea, we're going to peace with the Palestinians, normalization with the Arab world. What are you talking about? Things are looking so bright and beautiful. Why are you such a party spoiler? Later on, I read this article again. It really predicted rightly what's going on today. But it wasn't, all you had to do was to go to the Israeli textbook in the educational system. All you had to do was to listen to not the people in Tel Aviv, but to the people in the development towns, in the poor neighborhoods of Israel, in the settlements. You needed to listen to the rabbis, to their political leaders, to see what they were talking about, to understand that a very different interpretation of how to deal with the two basic challenges of Zionism is on its way to become a powerful idea that would attract a lot of people, especially among the younger generation. And it came to the fold in the 2022 November elections in Israel, but it was already there in the making. Now, you needed, of course, some additional processes to make such a dangerous vision of a future Israel with its horrific destructive impact on the Palestinians, the Lebanese, and the region as a whole. You needed also other allies. Like in the beginning of Zionism, you need a coalition to sustain such an idea. The Israelis themselves are not powerful enough to make it work. So what came to the assistance of of Zionism 2.0 to become a dominant ideology in Israel? First of all, the changes in the Republican Party in the United States. Christian Zionism that was so important in creating the Zionist project in the late 19th century came back and became a very powerful ideology of the Republican Party in the United States, including some of the people who surround President Trump today. So they see eye to eye with these people. Think about the American ambassador to Israel today, Huckabee. He's a personal manifestation of that ideological alliance between Christian fundamentalism and Jewish fundamentalism, and two very powerful armies behind them. It's not just two powerful people. These are two powerful. You needed the right wing in Europe to become stronger. And as you know, there is an emergence of a neo-right fascist, extreme right parties in Europe who are becoming very popular, very powerful. In some places they are now in decline, thank God. But I'm talking about the period of 10 to 15 years ago, they were in the ascendance. I would throw into the mix people like Modi in India as well, and Bolsonaro in Brazil. I mean, there was an international coalition that saw nothing wrong with the vision of a greater Israel as something that, reflects their own political vision. There's also the sinister role that military industries, securitization industries, high-tech industry, even pharmaceutical giants are also playing in such an alliance. Israel is a great asset to these multinational corporations. There is this horrible statistics that I'm sure we're all familiar with, that when Israel uses cutting-edge technology and lethal weapons against the Palestinians, the sales of the Israeli military industries increased dramatically. After every action in Gaza, the sales were very high because you could see how these new weapons are being tested in life. There's a very good film by an Israeli director. The film is called The Laboratory. The guy's name is Feldman, who did exactly a documentary on this, showing the connection between the attacks on Gaza and the profits of the Israeli military industry. So they are also, I think, connecting to this. And then you have the leaders in the Arab world who think that they would benefit from normalizing relationship with the State of Israel. They are not only normalizing relationship with the State of Israel, they are normalizing the colonization of Palestine. And this is also true about some other countries in the global south, that contrary to what probably most people in our societies feel, are going along with this, whatever reasons, whether they think it can allow them a better place in the White House or it benefits their own security interest, whatever reason, there was a strong enough coalition. But I will not end on such a pessimistic point. I think what happens when such ideologies become state ideologies, and this is what happened in Israel, that it's not only that you have a success in the elections, so the people who represent these kinds of visions of a greater Israel that extends not only over Palestine, but also maybe over South Lebanon and South Syria, the vision that Israel will be more theocratic, the vision that you have no moral inhibitions in trying and finish what you didn't finish in the Nakba. When it's not just a matter of winning the elections. What is important, that representative of this ideology become dominant figures in the army, in the secret service, in the Mossad, in the educational system, in the media. Because that means that even if you lose the next election, which is possible, you already have a foundation in the institutions that run the state. And that's my great worry about Israel. I'm not looking to the next election as a tiebreaker, even if Netanyahu would lose. If at all he would allow elections, that's a big question. He's doing all he can to prevent the elections. But even if he loses, the foundation of this, what I call Messianic Israel, sometimes I call it the state of Judea instead of the state of Israel, all of this is not going dramatically to change. And that is something the world has to decide what to do with, you know. Because I think what happened to people who were genuinely not anti-Palestinians, who were not genuinely anti-peace, who somehow believed that, you know, I'm talking people mainly in the West, but not only, who believe that maybe there is a way of reconciling the presence of the Jewish national movement in Palestine with the ambitions of the Palestinians. For many years they thought that it's around the corner. What you need are dynamics of change inside Israel, and they create the kind of leadership that will take you towards, I don't know, a two-state solution, peace, and so on. I think they need to be on the alert that these dynamics of change do not exist anymore. That if there are any dynamics in change, they go in the orientation that I was talking about. And I'm saying it very sadly as an Israeli Jew. I don't think there is chance for a change in Israeli policies in the future. And the question is, at what point would people, I'm not talking about the people in Israel, but at what point would the Arab neighbors of Israel, at what point would the Muslim states, at what point would the Western state, at what point would the international community would say, wait a minute, this is not just a matter that affects the Palestinians, which we didn't mind, to be honest. for many years. It is affecting the region as a whole and maybe the world as a whole. Right now, if you look at the Middle East, there are 6 million people who are refugees because of the Israeli actions. 2 million refugees in Gaza and the West Bank, 1 million refugees in Lebanon, and 3 million refugees in Tehran. 6 million people are refugees because of Israeli actions. Now, of course, American-Israeli actions. So, obviously, as long as the world doesn't want to face America, there's no danger for Israel to be faced by the world that doesn't want to face America. Is the fact that the EU was unwilling to join the Israeli-American attack on Iran an indication that something is changing in the global balance? Too early to say. But it shows you that there's some sort of understanding that the unconditional support that the EU has given Israel and unwillingness to face American policy in the Middle East has dire consequences for the Europeans themselves. Not on moral grounds, on economic grounds, on energy grounds. Is the fact that in the United States we have a Democratic Party that we have never seen before. A Democratic Party where if you want to be the next candidate for president in the United States of the Democratic Party, you better show some solidarity with the Palestinians. That's incredible. I mean, 20 years ago, if you wanted to be the candidate of the Democratic Party in the United States for president, you needed to show unconditional allegiance to Israel and to visit AIPAC 3 times as if it was the mosque. Now, you better show some distance for AIPAC as the next candidate for the Democratic Party if you want to have some chance of your party electing you. And of course, the election of Mamdani in New York, a pro-Palestinian Muslim person in the biggest Jewish city in the world, shows you something of that process. Is the fact that so many millions around the world, including in this country, are showing solidarity with Palestine like never before, a counterbalance to what I described? Is this the making of a global alliance that would contrary or would counter the global alliances that allowed the dispossession, the colonization of Palestine? All these are questions. I'm not answering them. I'm putting them because we are seeing processes in the making that we don't know yet how they will mature and when will they mature. But there are processes of change. Processes of change in the international global constellation. I could add to this the position of China, which are different from the position of other countries with regard to Palestine, not necessarily for moral support for the Palestinians, but from the Chinese perspective on global politics. You have changes in countries such as Brazil. South Africa is reasserting a certain global perspective. All of these are not yet fusing together into a transformative moment in history, but there are definitely potential processes that can transform the issue. In fact, in my last book, Israel on the Brink, I claim that these processes are so far now in their making that they are inevitable to my mind. So for me, it's not a question of will they eventually fuse together into a dramatic change in the reality in Palestine, in the region. The question is when will it happen, which of course I cannot know, but not if. But I also add something else in the book, and that's my experience as an historian. Something that crumbles, something that disintegrates, and I do believe that the Zionist project is in its last chapter, for all the reasons I just counted. First, there are 3 things that you know as an historian. Disintegration can be a very slow process. And we saw it in Syria. What happened when in Libya, in Yemen? You know, when countries are losing their center the disintegration can turn into a civil war, into a lot of suffering for the people before something better or something new replaces the old ancient regime. Okay. So that's one thing we have to be worried about, that the fact that it disintegrates does not mean necessarily the beginning of a different, much better political structure for the people who live there. Secondly, disintegration creates vacuum, a void. Who will replace the void? It's very important. Palestinian national movement right now is too fragmented, too disunited to be able to fill the void. I have great confidence in the younger Palestinian generation. I think they're far more united, they're far more consensual, they have better ideas, I think, of how to organize the Palestinian political experience, but they haven't done it yet. We know from the Arab Spring and so on, when there is a void and you're not well prepared structurally and organization-like to fill the void is going to be filled by someone else. So you have back Sisi instead of Mubarak in the end of the day, with all the demonstration and everything that people paid for making Egypt, for instance, a more democratic country. And by that, I ended my chances of revisiting Egypt in the next 10 years, but what can you do? So that is something else, that the Palestinian national movement, its ability to organize, but not only that, to answer questions which they will have to ask if indeed there is going to be this dramatic change in Palestine. What would be the future of the 8 million Jews who live in Palestine today? What would be the future of all the things that Israel did build and may still be important for the future? You can't destroy everything. How do you reconnect to the Arab world? What do you reconnect to in the Arab world, right? All the things that were robbed from the Palestinians by the Zionist project are not easily rebuilt. And it's good to start with it. And the last issue, and with this I will end, which is probably the most problematic for all of us, that this is a long-term process, and we are all aware of the urgency of what's going to happen tomorrow, next year, in the next 2 years. You cannot go and give a lecture in the University of Gaza and tell people, you know, there are processes of change that eventually would make, and I do believe in it, will make this place a better place in the future, because that doesn't help them to survive the next Israeli attack, the hunger, the famine, the lack of medicine, the lack of infrastructure, the stagnation, everything that they are suffering from. And there is this navigation between your understanding strategically of these processes and your wish as an activist to stop genocide, ethnic cleansing, oppression, and so on. So the main problem, as you understand it, I'm sure you do, is that while a lot of people in the civil society in the world understand the urgency of taking firm action against Israel to stop the genocide in Gaza, the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, the discrimination against the Palestinians inside Israel, the Israeli aggressive policy towards its neighbors, the governments, especially in the global north, are hesitant to take such an action. Because still, apparently, from their perspective, Israel is an asset and not a liability. And they will not change their mind because of moral issues. They will change their mind if, for their own political career, Israel will become a liability. And I think this will happen, but we should find a way, of course, of making it happen sooner rather than later. We have to make sure that the wishes of people in the Arab world are translated in the policies of the Arab states, which hasn't happened yet, and so on in other places. Now, I will just give you one example, and with this I would end. I'm not even thinking about a dramatic act that would totally, fundamentally change the reality in Palestine. As I said, this is a long process. There are no shortcuts in history, in decolonization and justice and so on. You cannot do these things in a day. But you can defend people. You can ease their suffering. You can tame the aggression. If the EU, for instance, would have imposed on Israel 50% of the sanction it imposed on Russia because of its invasion of the Ukraine, the lives of thousands of Palestinians would have been saved. So sometimes we should ask, maybe not for the big change, but at least for the, the most smallest steps, but at least the steps in the right direction when we strategize as a solidarity movement, when we're thinking about the best way of changing the reality. Because if not stopped, and I can say this unfortunately with certainty, if not stopped, there will be another attack on Iran. There will be another attempt to annex South Lebanon, in parts of South Syria, not to mention the continued incremental genocide of the people in Gaza, the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians in the West Bank, and what we call now in Israel the quiet transfer of the Palestinian citizens of Israel. There are 2 million of them. They are not being directly treated as those in the West Bank, but with other more sophisticated means. There's pressure on them to leave through the support the Israeli police is giving to criminal gangs to terrorize life in the Palestinian villages in the south and the north of the state. So all of these are policies which are justified. Now, there are still millions of Israelis who do not subscribe to these ideas. However, they don't have an alternative vision. Their alternative vision, that you can call the liberal Zionist vision, as I said, has totally failed. And they are even themselves aware of it. So they choose two solutions. One, to leave. And they're leaving in huge numbers. Nobody allows to get access to the real statistics of how many people left. Well, we know that the numbers is great. Secondly, they still try to stick to these old ideas that somehow you can reconcile the idea of a colonial racist state with the idea of democracy. My hope is that somehow in the future they would understand that you can either be a democratic state for all or a racist state. There's no golden mean between the two. But they are not the ones who are going to bring the change. They are the ones who will join the change, I hope, as did white people in South Africa that rejected the fall of apartheid for many years and then joined the new post-apartheid South Africa. Okay, I think I talked enough. I'll stop here, and I hope to hear your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Pappé, for condensing your years and years of work and research into such a thought-provoking lecture for us today. We really appreciate your time joining us here, and I'm sure our audience here are burning with questions and would like to hear some insights and your thoughts on some of the topic. See, first hand right up. Please, Dr. Imtiaz.
Good afternoon, Professor. My name is Imtiaz Muqbil. I'm a journalist based in Bangkok. I've been writing about the Palestinian issue for the last 40 years, and I must congratulate your star power. This is the largest audience I've ever seen for any kind of event like this in the last 40 years. I also want to congratulate Dr. Farida Adisara for her efforts. The Palestinian Solidarity Group here is for the first time led by a woman. And as you can see, so between her and you, I think we've got a great going. And I think, inshallah, the progressive movements that you're talking about will find a corner, will find a change that you so hope will come about. I had two questions for you. One is, you mentioned the disunity among the Palestinian factions, and you mentioned the Zohran Mamdani as well. Why is it that the Palestinians are so disunited? Because obviously when you have, I'm sorry to say, a doddering buffoon like Mahmoud Abbas running the thing, I mean, you cannot have a counter movement unless you're well led. So why do these people allow this thing to happen? I mean, it's just beyond comprehension, because unless you have a good, powerful leader to be the vanguard of this counter movement, nothing's going to happen. My second question is on a historic moment. I was the only journalist from Asia on the night of 4th November 1995, when Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a Jewish extremist fundamentalist terrorist. At that time, I heard Yitzhak Rabin himself. He was like this in a conference, speaking just 20 meters away from the conference that I was attending, talking about dreams of peace, where he saw the entire Middle East being converted into a zone of peace, which would be crisscrossed with pilgrims and tourists and economic development, etc., etc. But to many people, when I raised this issue with them, they say Yitzhak Rabin was a fraud, that he didn't actually mean anything of that. It was just a means of trying to cover up things that he was trying to do. But when I heard him actually speak, I thought he was speaking from the heart. He talked about being an old military general who wanted to see dreams of peace for the young people. What was he actually? Was he a fraud, or did he actually dream of peace that could have possibly materialized today if he had not been assassinated by one of his own? Thank you very much.
Thank you. To the first question, I think that the present reality of Palestinian politics is, first of all, the outcome of the fragmentation of the Nakba of 1948, when the Palestinians were divided into different communities, ruled by different regimes by Israel, that disabled them in many ways to create a proper national movement. I also have to say that in many ways the so-called peace process created further divisions in the Palestinian national movement. The reality of being occupied and colonized for more than 100 years made it very difficult, I think, to organize a united, effective leadership, as you call it, or even national liberation organization. And it all comes back to what we see among most cases where indigenous people are faced with settler colonial projects. Unlike colonialist projects, take India, for instance, settler colonialism is such a powerful idea of totally robbing you of your right to your land that it's very difficult to create a counter-narrative. Because you know you are part of the land because you've been there for centuries. So it took time to realize that you need to defend your right to be in your land. And I think that you can see historically how slow it takes, or how much time it takes for the Palestinians to develop a clear national claim when they think there's no need, rightly in many ways, for them to put a claim. What do I have? I live here for 1,000 years in this building. Why do I have to put a claim? But you have to. Unfortunately, you have to, because the counterclaim is very sophisticated, is very clever, is very lethal to you. So I think it takes time. Now, I do believe that some of the factionalism that disabled Palestinians for putting forward an effective, it's not just a matter of leadership to my mind, it's an effective vision. An effective vision to my mind is more important than leadership. There are two issues. One is that, Palestinians, even with the leadership capacity, somehow believe that maybe the two-state solution would put an end to their suffering. Somehow maybe, Israel would let them have a state in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. This would, make them at least have some of Palestine, even if it's only 22%, right? And I think it took time for them to understand that nobody in Israel really meant to have a real two-state solution, that it was just a facade for having another way of continuing the occupation. But by the time you realize it, you already have the Palestinian Authority, you already have areas A, B, and C, you have the Hamas and the Islamic Jihad fighting against it. You already have such a commotion, if you want, that it's very difficult to get out of it. So one way of putting forward, for me, is not finding the leader yet. Is to go back to the basic Palestinian vision of one democratic state. And I'm part of a movement called the One Democratic State in Palestine. Mostly Palestinians, some of us are Jews who support this idea. Because the only way of having a Palestinian position that means something to the world is now the position of having a democratic state, a free Palestine. I know that everybody is trying to revive the two-state solution, but the two-state solution is a dead body. It's in the morgue, and it needs a funeral. But nobody dares to give it. Too many interests are vested in this idea, even by people who know that this is not a workable idea anymore. So that's one problem. The second problem is something I sometimes identify with the young generation, sometimes I'm a bit annoyed by this. I think that the more powerful movements that you have in the Palestinian youth society today are definitely evolving around the idea of a one state, are far more united, are less factionalized, they're not Fatah, they're not Hamas, they're not the left, they really are united around the vision. But they have a problem with organizations and hierarchies. We saw it in the Arab Spring because they think it brings corruption because that's what they learned from the history of such institutions. But we know as historians that without institutions, without organization, you don't make revolutions. Just by the power of justice, you don't change realities. And I always remember a conversation I had with leaders of the Egyptian youth movement in 2012 when they told me, I asked them why don't they cooperate with the trade unions and you know, in Egypt, and said, no, we don't like organizations and so on. So I said to them, you know, you're like people who found a source of fresh water and you want to bring it to other people, but you don't like bottles. So you bring the water with your hands and you're surprised that at the end of the day, there's no water. So if you don't like bottles, use jerrycans. I mean, but you need an organization. So I think hopefully this would come out. So I'm not sure it's a matter of a leader, but rather vision and a leadership as a plural thing, to my mind. But of course, it's up to the Palestinians to decide how to do it. As for Rabin, you know, I had, in my sins, I was recruited to the early stages of Oslo in 1992, and I was even working a little bit with Rabin in 1992. So I came to know the man a bit more intimately, and I wrote about him, and he knew it, as a war criminal in 1948. I thought he committed war crimes in 1948. He committed war crimes in the first Intifada in 1987 when he called on the soldiers to break the bones, literally, to break the bones of Palestinian demonstrators. So that was one side to him. On the other side, I do believe that he was beginning to see a different way of looking at the reality. I do believe it was genuine. It was genuine. It was not enough. First of all, it was not enough. Whatever he thought that revolutionized his view on Palestine it was far away from what was needed. Had he not been assassinated, maybe this trajectory would have continued. I don't know. It's difficult for me to say. But at the moment that he was assassinated, his vision and those around him of what they can offer to the Palestinians was not enough to end the occupation, the colonization, and the suffering. But yes, I do think there was something potentially there, but I can't prove it, and I don't know it. But definitely, you know, in 1995, even those who regarded themselves the peace camp in Israel were still misunderstanding or unwilling to understand, it doesn't matter, same thing in the end of the day, what was the core of the issue? What was the problem with Zionism? What was the problem of the basic Israeli treatment of Palestine, the Arab world, and the Muslim world? And they were far from apprehending this. So, yeah, that's all I can offer at this stage.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pappé. Can we have the next question from the lady in the front here? Could you please speak on the mic, please? Thank you.
Thank you. My question is we see a lot of Israeli settlements happening now outside of the Middle East. They are buying up huge amounts of land in Kenya, in Patagonia, Greek islands. So I'm trying to understand, is this an indication that they've lost faith in the sustainability of Israel, or is it part of the greater Israel project going international? Thank you.
No, I don't think it's part of Israeli imperialism to take over the world. It reminds me, you know, when I was a student in Oxford, in 1982, I had a poster in my dormitories which says, "Come and visit Israel before it visits you." No, I don't think that this is part of the plan. No, I think it's more serious than that in terms that this is part of the economic and social elite of Israel that do not see a way out of the challenges that I described. I wish that they would have subscribed to my views and say, yes, there is an alternative, but they can't subscribe to my alternative. They're afraid of it. They think it's another way of, or a suicide track for them, because they were brought up on fearing the Palestinians, you know, and believing that they have no future there. And on the other hand, they have the means to leave. Many of them have dual nationalities. Many of them have professions that they can ignite elsewhere. Many of them have the capital to begin new life. But it is a vote of non-confidence in the future of Israel, undoubtedly. And in my book, Israel on the Brink, I claim that this emigration is not the only process, but one of the many processes that make the future of Israel very questionable if it will continue to be the way I think it will be. Of course, if there will be dramatic change, things can change. But the trajectory is in a direction that I share with these people, although I have a different way of dealing with it. I share with them that the trajectory means an unlikely change in the orientation of Israeli policies domestically and externally. And I think that's what this phenomenon is all about.
Does anyone else have a question you'd like to ask Professor Pappé? Yes, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm Siri Coleman from Thomas Hart University. I'd like to thank Professor Pappé for that very insightful presentation of the history and the evolution of Israeli policy. But as you say, there's very little chance of any change in Israel's policies. Given that, and as you say, the two-state solution is now in the morgue, awaiting a funeral. When you say that the solution is a free Palestinian state, what are, how would that look like? What would be the boundaries of this free state, and how would it be accomplished? It seems to be placed on the onus seems to be placed on the Palestinians themselves, or some kind of Arab coalition. How would this be achieved, in your opinion? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I do think what is very important is to have the Palestinians in the driver's seat about answering these questions. It's up to them to decide the kind of future that they have, but they will have to calculate, factor in the presence of millions of Jews in it and other issues. But I do believe, in my last book, Israel on the Brink, I bring a list of several questions that will have to be answered on the way of thinking more practically and pragmatically of the one-state solution. And the answers I give to these questions are taken from my conversations with young Palestinians to see how they see solutions to these issues. And there will be a lot of challenges, no doubt about it. Secondly, I must say that, one of the incredible development that I was fortunate enough to contribute to is the emergence of what is called in the Western academia of Palestine studies. I founded the first academic center for Palestine studies in the West at the University of Exeter. Now we have 9 such centers around the world. I hope this university will have a center for Palestine studies soon. You need one. And what we succeeded in doing is providing safe spaces for postgraduates who are either Palestinians or interested in Palestine, who really work as academics on answering your questions. Namely, what can we learn from other cases of decolonization, reconciliation, restorative justice, in building a different vision for Palestine? Not just out of imagination, but out of hard academic work. What does it mean? How do you protect the rights of everyone, including the Jews, in such a place? How do you restore property? What does it mean to practically allow refugees to return? How do you do this? What does it mean to replace a regime that has inbuilt apartheid, racism in it towards the Palestinians into a regime that does not repeat another kind of apartheid? How do we learn from the mistakes of decolonization elsewhere? How do we learn from the mistakes of South Africa that was very good in ending political apartheid but retained economic apartheid? So this is something that hundreds of these postgraduates have been working on, published articles, works, and so on. So there is now, they are not the leaders of the future, but they have provided a huge literature, a reservoir of ideas and programs and so on that would help to cast content into the idea of the one state. You know, I go back to my last book. I'm very realistic there, I think. I'm not trying to say that if at all it will help, it will happen, and I do believe it will, and I hope it will. If we are all going to move in the next 30 years or something like this into a different reality in Palestine, I'm not saying that this is an easy road forward. No decolonization in history was a walk in the park. I do hope it would be as little violent as possible, but I'm not illuding myself that violence would not be part of it. I hope it would be tamed. I hope it will be contained. I know from decolonization that not always the decolonized regime is better than the colonized one. We have too many examples of that as well. So all is that is taken into account. But for me, and this is the most important issue right now, apart from dealing with the urgent need to help the Palestinians against the Israeli wish to decimate them, is that this should be the conversation. How would a free Palestine look like? Not how do we get to the two-state solution. And this is not easy to get it into the mainstream media and mainstream politics. You know, I tour Europe a lot and I meet with ministries of foreign affairs. And many of the EU members have, in their foreign ministry, have a section which is called the Middle East Peace Process. So I'm sitting with these usually 5 young civil servants in Holland or in Belgium, you know. And I said, do you know that you belong to a section of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that is dealing with something that doesn't exist? It doesn't bode well for what your colleagues think about you if they pushed you to this department of nothing and anything. And you can see their eyes sort of open up and say, what do you mean? I said, you are responsible for the Middle East peace process. Is there a Middle East peace process? Maybe there's a peace process, but not in the Middle East. And you can see that they begin to digest it until the senior director comes and says it's time to lunch. So that the conversation would not go into any unpleasant direction. So I think this is where it's not that we have all the answers to your questions, but we are finally dealing with these questions. And sometimes you have young Palestinians dealing with it very locally. They think about a village that their grandparents had been expelled from in the Galilee, and they're building a model of how this village would look after the return. Sometimes they deal with it on the grand scale, like our dear, dear friend Salman Abu Sitta, who has a huge project of how the right of return would look all over historical Palestine. Everybody deals with it in a different way. But those with the power to change things are not dealing with it at all. And we have to find a way of telling them this is the case. And this comes to your first question. Without a proper Palestinian national movement, the world will not take seriously such a position. They won't take it seriously if it comes from me. They will take it seriously if this would be the declared Palestinian position, the declared position of the Palestinian national movement.
Thank you, Professor. We'll have one last question from the gentleman right here, please.
Charlie Thane from Tamazat also. Thank you very much, Professor Pappé, for the fascinating insight into the history here of this Greater Israel project. Listening to the story that you were telling, it was a very compelling explanation, I guess, of the power of ideas in this kind of settler colonial project. But what it kind of strikes me that you kind of didn't address quite so much, and I wonder if I could ask you to address a little bit more in the comments, is the sort of power of material interests in this settler colonial project. Colonialism is shaped by ideas and ideology, but colonialism is also about power of land, resources, trade, and the like. And I think the Greater Israel vision has only been sort of enabled and emboldened by the coincidence of imperialist interests in the Middle East, not just the US, not just the UK, but increasingly also the Gulf states, right? The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia. So I wonder if you could say a little bit about the material interests here in this Greater Israel vision, particularly thinking about, say, the role of Gulf finance capital in this Greater Israel vision, particularly the role of kind of Turkey in gas pipelines, the economic corridor that's being considered between India and Israel, and the role of Saudi Arabia, Israeli weapons, Israeli infrastructure. That seems to be sort of an aspect of this Greater Israeli vision that is perhaps underemphasized in that very compelling kind of ideological account that you've given.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, as I said also at the beginning of the Zionist project, you needed in the coalition people who also had, if you want, materialist interest in Palestine and supporting it. Of course, there are economic and materialist interest in the Greater Israel, whether it is companies that build settlements or international companies that are excited by the idea of extended railway systems and so on. But my point is different. I think that was the danger of what I could call the Marxist analysis of these issues. It totally undermined the power of ideology. So what you have, and that's why I'm thinking we are in a moment of truth, similar to the moment of truth that capitalists faced with Hitler in 1939. And I'm not comparing, so nobody would report me to the police. I'm just talking about the historical situation here. Namely, you can see people today sitting in Abu Dhabi and Dubai and in Riyadh and in Washington who thought that really the Israeli bonanza of Greater Israel is profitable. And they know that the bank that has the profits can be destroyed by a missile tomorrow. What I'm trying to say is that if you disregard the ideology, you suddenly see that all your economic benefits can disappear into the air by a war. That's what happened in Europe in 1939. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that it's not important to expose the multinational corporation, the local regional economic powers that are behind it. But maybe I don't always agree with historians who think that this is the only power behind it. I think it goes together with political power and ideological power. And I think that what you can never underestimate, and it's difficult to most normal people, I know, but what you cannot underestimate, that when someone has a vision that goes back to something that they believed happened 2,000 years ago, they will implement it regardless of the economic price. And that's where all these economic interests that are integrated into the project, or those who are behind this project, will have to rethink whether they made even the right financial or economic decision. That's why I'm hopeful there. I can give you another example for that. What we are talking here is a coalition that can change the reality either because for moral reasons, which is most people in civil societies, say this is injustice and I want this injustice to end. And you have millions of people demonstrating in Rome, in London, and elsewhere, saying we don't want this injustice to continue. Or people who say Israel is not anymore an asset. It's not a bonanza anymore. It's a liability. And maybe selling weapons to Saudi Arabia is more profitable than selling weapons to Israel. The Saudis don't mention the Holocaust when they do a deal on the weapons. So you know, this is a very cynical approach to that. And I think on all these fronts, the idea that the territorial imperialism that now the United States is re-implementing in the region, historically, I have a feeling that this is a throwback to the past rather than a look at the future, to my mind. What I'm trying to say is that this is the last chapter of this kind of imperialism rather than a new one. In a way, if you're probably familiar with the work of Eric Hobsbawm, The Age of Extreme. He finished it in 1992. I think it continued until 2026. Exactly the features of what he described. But I think it is an age that comes to an end. And with it also, these connections that or these investments that you are talking about, they are on a very precarious foundation because people do not understand the volatility of those who are there to implement it in this case. I think we have to take that into account. But definitely, you're absolutely right. There are capitalist interests behind this. But they do change. You know, if you think about capitalism in Israel, at first they were very excited about the occupation of the West Bank. Cheap labor from the West Bank, you know, imposing Israeli products on the West Bank, using the West Bank as a gate to the Arab world and to Asia. Now most of those we would regard probably presenting Israeli capitalism are totally against keeping the West Bank. It's not economically, it doesn't benefit them anymore. It's not a moral issue, it's an economic issue. So I think the interplay between these ideologies and economic interests is something we have to keep looking at rather than isolating the one from the other. Thank you.
I think we have time for one final question, I believe. Our audience here have something they would like to ask.
What ways do you reckon Thailand is most complicit in Israeli apartheid?
Maybe I should wait to the answer before I leave. Just before I leave. Or after I leave, I'll send you the reply. First of all, let's say, I mean, with all due respect to Thailand, and I have a lot of respect to Thailand, a dramatic change in the Thai policy, for instance, is not as crucial as the change in the position of the United States, the EU, the Arab world, or even countries such as Malaysia and Indonesia, not to mention India. But the world is a place where changes in the position of one state can create changes in the positions of other states. So I'm not an expert on how deep is the trade the military trade, the security trade. I haven't examined it. Between Thailand and Israel, I know, of course, of the effect of the economy of some of the many people who come from Thailand to work in Israel. Knowingly or unknowingly, they are invited there because Israel doesn't want to employ Palestinians. I don't know how much of them are aware that this is also a racist decision, not just an economic decision. On the other hand, it's the livelihood of people who come from here to there. All of these are small features of the oppression, not the big features. But let me put it this way. There are two ways that I think make Palestine the epicenter of so many problems in our world. A lot of people rightly say to me, why Palestine? Look what's happened in the Sudan. Look what happened in Democratic Republic in Congo. So many places that deserve our attention, maybe even should be the epicenter from their perspective. And I say, you're right. Of course, this is not the only place of injustice. But it is a very good place to start challenging injustice because this is still an unrecognized injustice. There's a difference between an injustice that we all are aware of. Maybe we're not doing enough, but we're not denying the injustice. So first of all, I think Palestine is an epicenter here because it's still a matter of discussion. It's unbelievable whether the Palestinians are victims of injustice. This is incredible. This is, you know, I opened a charity called the Nakba Memorial Foundation in Britain. And I had to go to court against the Charity Commission of Britain because they said Nakba is a political term. And you cannot you're not allowed to open a charity if it's not a cultural issue. You cannot open a political charity. And I said, no, Nakba is not a political term. It's an objective term of what happened to the Palestinians in 1948. We won the case, but I needed to, you know, to make sure that the term Nakba and the term Palestine are accepted as the way to look at the place and the people, what happened to them. So, first of all, this double talk, this hypocrisy about Palestine is something that you would like every state, including Thailand, to in whatever format, to say our role now as a member of the community of the world, a member of the United Nations, is not anymore to be part of the game that says the world has to help the two sides to mediate between them. No. The role of the world is now to defend the Palestinians. And that should be the role also of the Thai government, as far as it can devote out of the geographical location in which it exists and its all challenges to an issue such as Palestine. Secondly, I think, and that's very important, I think people realize, and I realize it when I talk to the young Italians who participated in 1 million demonstration in Rome. I asked them, what are you doing here? You know, and for them it was very clear that the injustice in their government's policy towards Palestine reflects the injustice of their government's policy towards everything in the country. So this connection between injustice in one place that reflects a much global injustice of issue is really the most important message that I think, especially Gaza, brought to the world. Europe, without consultation of much of the world in 1945, when much of the world was still colonized, decided what is universal law, what is international justice, what are human rights, what are civil rights, the Human Rights Declaration of 48, the United Nations, the International Court of Justice. All of these supposedly universal institutions upholding justice in the world at large, but established by people who were still part of colonial empires at the time that they did it. Not surprisingly, what Gaza did, it showed how it doesn't work. It doesn't work when one of the what was regarded part of the European civilization is the one that should be brought to justice. Then it doesn't work. It works for everyone else. Which means that part of what we are doing, and that's relevant to Thailand as well, that if we want to, as a human society, deal with global challenges, and we have huge global challenges, ecological ones, the challenge of poverty, the challenge of immigration, all of these cannot be done by one country. You need global cooperation. Without that, you will never be able to deal with it. Now, you cannot have global cooperation if you don't have a consensus of international justice, international morality. And you cannot have it under the power structure that you have today in the world. And Palestine is the most important example of that balance of power, whether it's economic, strategic, or military. And therefore, I think it's important also for the people of Thailand to understand that injustice in Palestine is injustice in Asia, is injustice in the world, that eventually affects every one of us. And it's not just confined to what would be the future of the Palestinians and the Israelis. It's a far bigger question of the essence of politics, of the responsibility of politicians. Here and elsewhere, we know that we have too many politicians who are self-centered, interested in career rather than in solving issues. All of this comes to a very clear manifestation when you look at the world, the way that there is a complicity or indifference, either in Thailand at the political level, or the mainstream media, or in other countries, which may have more bearing right now on the reality in Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for sharing your time and your invaluable insights with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for Professor Ilan Pappé. And on behalf of the organizing committee, we would like to present a token of appreciation to you. So may I invite Dr. Adisaragatip to in front of the stage to present the token of appreciation to Professor Ilan Pappé. Ladies and gentlemen, so we will now have a short 10-minute break. Please enjoy the refreshment outside. And I would like to promote this book by Professor Ilan Pappé, 10 Myths About Israel, which can be purchased just outside during the coffee break. So please be back here in 10 minutes to continue our program. Thank you. Hello. Hi.
Where did you say that we could
Just outside here. Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you so much.
Can you try? Okay. Can you give us a thumbs up if you can hear us?
คือเหมือนจะยังไม่ได้ยิน
ยังไม่ได้ยิน Okay, thumbs up. Okay, you can hear us. So,เรายังไม่ได้ยินเขาเนอะ Okay, Dr. Muslim, can you just speak and we will test the audio. Okay, at the moment your video is frozen.
The camera is clear. Okay, I'm very good now. Is my voice clear? Frozen. Oh. How about the audio clear? Hello?
Okay, hi Dr. Muslim, can you try
Hi,
speaking?
hello. Yeah. How clear is the image?
We still cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now? Wait, let me change. Stop there. How about now? Is it clear now? Can you hear me now?
We're not getting any audio from your side.
Can you hear me now? Hello? Hello? Do you have a speaker? Speaker. This is your internet?
Hello. Hello. สวัสดีครับ
ดร.อาทิตย์ก่อน
ทดสอบ 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 ทดสอบ
มาถ่ายตรงนี้ไหม
Can you hear me now? Hello? Hello?
Welcome back everyone and thank you for returning. We will now continue with our distinguished faculty lecture, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to Assistant Professor Dr. Atit Thongin, President of the International Relation Program at the School of Political Science, Sukhothai Thammathirat Open University. Today, Dr. Atit will deliver a lecture entitled Settler Colonialism as a Crucial Strategy to Achieve the Greater Israel Vision and its Implication for Thailand. So please join me in welcoming Assistant Professor Dr. Atit Thongin.
สวัสดีทุกท่านนะครับ and good afternoon everyone. Please apologize to I will talk in my local language. Please trust me, it's better to let me talk in Thai, and we rely on the translator assistance. It's better for me to talk in Thai instead of English.ครับก็กลับสวัสดีทุกท่านนะครับสำหรับหัวข้อที่ทาง PSC ได้ประสานผมมาก็ต้องขอบคุณเพราะว่าหัวข้อนี้เนี่ยเป็นเรื่องที่มีความสำคัญในแวดวงวิชาการศึกษาเรื่องปาเลสไตน์มากขึ้นเรื่อยๆนะฮะเริ่มอย่างนี้ครับคือปัญหาปาเลสไตน์เนี่ยเป็นประเด็นที่แวดวงวิชาการมีการศึกษามากขึ้นเรื่อยๆนะฮะเรื่องราวความอายุติธรรมของพี่น้องชาวปาเลสไตน์ได้รับการศึกษาผ่านมิติที่หลากหลายทั้งทางรัฐศาสตร์กฎหมายสังคมวิทยามนุษยวิทยาแล้วก็อื่นๆนะฮะแต่วันนี้เนี่ยผมอยากจะชวนทุกท่านลองพิจารณาเรื่องนี้ผ่านอีกเลนหนึ่งนะซึ่งถือว่าเป็นสำนักเป็นแนวทางหนึ่งที่มีบทบาทสำคัญในทางวิชาการต่อวาระประเด็นนี้นะครับนั่นก็คือแวดวงวิชาการที่เราเรียกว่า settler colonial studies นะหรือแวดวงการศึกษาอาณานิคมรุกตั้งถิ่นฐานเรียกย่อๆว่า SCS นะครับสำหรับวงวิชาการนี้เนี่ยนะเวลาเราพูดถึงอาณานิคมโดยทั่วไปแล้วก็มักจะนึกถึงการที่รัฐมหาอำนาจไปยึดครองเพื่อเอาทรัพยากรและแรงงานเป็นที่ตั้งจากดินแดนเมืองขึ้นนะฮะแต่ settler colonialism เนี่ยหรืออาณานิคมรุกตั้งถิ่นฐานที่เรากำลังพูดถึงวันนี้เป้าหมายหลักของมันคือ territory หรือดินแดนแต่ความรุนแรงและแยบยลของมันก็คือว่าการมามันอยู่ที่ตรงการมาเพื่อต้องการจะอยู่ยาวนะฮะและการจะอยู่ยาวได้ก็ต้องมีการขจัดหรือทำให้เจ้าของที่ดินเดิมแตกแยกแตกละเอียดออกจากกันลบล้างเพื่อเข้าแทนที่แล้วสถาปนาอำนาจอธิปไตยใหม่ขึ้นโดยหมดจดและนั่นคือสิ่งที่อิสราเอลกระทำโดยแม้จะมีการใช้กลยุทธ์และนวัตกรรมในรายละเอียดบางประการแตกต่างกันไปในกาซาเวสต์แบงก์รวมถึงพื้นที่ของเยรูซาเล็มตะวันออกเป็นการเฉพาะแต่ทั้งหมดดำเนินไปภายใต้โครงการใหญ่และเป้าหมายเดียวกันคือการทำให้แผ่นดินปาเลสไตน์ไม่สามารถเป็นปึกแผ่นแตกละเอียดและทำให้ชาวปาเลสไตน์กลายเป็นเพียงกลุ่มคนที่กระจัดกระจายออกไปทั่วโลกหรือแม้กระทั่งกระจัดกระจายไร้อำนาจในบ้านของตนเองหนึ่งในสิ่งที่น่ากลัวและแยบยลที่สุดนะครับคือสิ่งที่ผมเรียกว่า normalized and unequal geographyนั่นคือการที่คนสองกลุ่มชนบนแผ่นดินเดียวกันมีสิทธิ์ไม่เท่ากัน เรื่องนี้ถูกทำให้เป็นเรื่องที่ยอมรับได้ผ่านการออกแบบกฎหมายการบริหารปกครองและพรมแดนซึ่งก็รวมถึงเส้นแบ่งภายในดินแดนของปาเลสไตน์เองอย่างสลับซับซ้อนดังนั้นสิ่งที่เราเห็นในวันนี้เนี่ยไม่ว่าจะเป็นเรื่องราวความอายุติธรรมที่ปรากฏบนหน้าข่าวแต่ละวันมันจึงไม่ใช่เพียงเหตุการณ์โดดๆที่แยกออกจากกันแต่มันเป็นเหมือนกับจิ๊กซอว์ชิ้นหนึ่งของภาพใหญ่เชิงโครงสร้างร่วมกันที่เรียกว่าตรรกะแห่งการขจัดให้สิ้นหรือ logic of elimination ที่ดำเนินมาอย่างยาวนานในประวัติศาสตร์สิ่งแรกนะครับที่ผมอยากจะชวนพิจารณาคือหัวใจของการทำความเข้าใจเรื่องนี้นะคือตั้งต้นจากการต้องแยกการทำงานของอาณานิคมรุกตั้งถิ่นฐานออกจากอาณานิคมแบบเก่ารูปแบบเก่าที่เราคุ้นเคยความต่างของสองประเภทนี้อยู่ตรงไหนนะฮะคืออาณานิคมแบบเก่าเนี่ยเหมือนที่เราเปรียบกับว่าเราเข้าไปเป็นผู้จัดการบริษัทเพื่อเอาปันผลและใช้แรงงานของพนักงานแต่อาณานิคมรุกตั้งถิ่นฐานเนี่ยมันคือการที่ผู้มาใหม่หรือ newcomer เนี่ยนะฮะบอกว่าที่นี่คือบ้านของฉันและพวกคุณที่อยู่เดิมต้องออกไปเสียมันคือการสร้างสังคมใหม่ทับที่สังคมเดิมจากการประมวลงานชิ้นหลักของนักวิชาการนะฮะจำนวนมากที่อยู่ในสาย Journal of Territorial Study เนี่ยไม่ว่าจะเป็นตัวหลักอย่างเวราชินีหรือวอลฟเราพอจะสรุปยุทธศาสตร์พื้นฐานของการล่าอาณานิคมรุกตั้งถิ่นฐานได้อย่างน้อย4ข้อฮะข้อที่1คือมาเพื่อยึดผู้ตั้งถิ่นฐานนะจะเคลื่อนย้ายจากภายนอกเข้าสู่ดินแดนของคนพื้นเมืองโดยได้รับการสนับสนุนจากรัฐแม่หรือดินแดนต้นทางเพื่อเข้ายึดครองที่ดินและทรัพยากรจากเดิมในยุโรปมาที่ดินแดนปาเลสไตน์นะครับก่อตั้งรัฐอิสราเอลขึ้นและหลังจากนั้นก็จากอิสราเอลเข้าไปยังเวสต์แบงก์กาซาและตอนหลังเราจะเห็นขยายไปยังเลบานอนตอนใต้และซีเรียตอนใต้ด้วย2นะครับคือตรรกะแห่งการขจัดให้สิ้น logic of elimination เนี่ยถือว่าเป็นคีย์เวิร์ดเป้าหมายของการทำเช่นนั้นคือการทำให้คนกลุ่มเดิมหายไปไม่ใช่แค่ปกครองนะฮะคือหายไปไม่ว่าจะด้วยการขับไล่การกลืนกลายวัฒนธรรมหรือทำลายรากเหง้าเพื่อให้กลุ่มคนมาใหม่สามารถเข้าแทนที่ได้อย่างสมบูรณ์3นะครับมีลักษณะเป็นโครงสร้างข้อความนี้ถือว่าเป็นวรรคทองของแพทริกวอลฟนะที่วอลฟเนี่ยหมายถึงว่ามันไม่ใช่เหตุการณ์ที่เกิดขึ้นเพียงครั้งเดียวอย่างปี1948หรือปีไหนๆนะฮะแต่มันมีรูปแบบเป็นกฎหมายมีรูปแบบของการล่าอาณานิคมเนี่ยเป็นกฎหมายเป็นโครงสร้างเป็นระบบของการบริหารปกครองครอบงำเป็นวิธีคิดที่ยังคงทำงานอยู่ทุกวันนี้มาจนถึงปัจจุบันแล้วก็ข้อที่4อธิปไตยคือปลายทางเหนือสิ่งอื่นใดย้ำอีกครั้งนะครับปลายทางของการล่าอาณานิคมรูปแบบนี้เนี่ยไม่ใช่เรื่องแรงงานหรือการขูดรีดทรัพยากรแต่คือการสถาปนาอำนาจอธิปไตยและการอยู่อย่างถาวรเพราะฉะนั้นนะครับเวลาที่เรามองความขัดแย้งในโลกปัจจุบันถ้าเราเห็นภาพการยึดครองที่ดินถาวรและการพยายามแทนที่ประชากรเดิมก็ให้ตระหนักไว้ก่อนเลยนะครับว่านี่คือสัญญาณเตือนความเสี่ยงว่าเรากำลังเผชิญหน้ากับปรากฏการณ์อาณานิคมรุกตั้งถิ่นฐานและการอ้างถึงงานของวอลฟนะครับในปี1999ชิ้นที่ผมเสนอเมื่อสักครู่เนี่ยก็จึงถือเป็นจุดเปลี่ยนสำคัญในทางวิชาการเพราะมันทำให้เราเลิกมองว่าอาณานิคมมันเป็นเรื่องของอดีตมันพ้นสมัยไปแล้วแต่หาเป็นเช่นนั้นไม่ในความเป็นจริงคือมันคือเรื่องของปัจจุบันที่ฝังรากอยู่ในโครงสร้างทางการเมืองการปกครองกฎหมายเศรษฐกิจและสังคมของดินแดนต่างๆประเด็นต่อมานะครับคือในแวดวงวิชาการที่เรียกว่าอาณานิคมรุกตั้งถิ่นฐานศึกษาหรือ SCS เนี่ยก็เขามีการผลิตวารสารวิชาการของตนเองที่ตีพิมพ์บทความหัวข้อนี้ อย่างสม่ำเสมอมาจนถึงปัจจุบันทุกท่านพอจะทราบไหมครับว่าในรอบ10 ปีที่ผ่านมางานวิชาการด้านอาณานิคมรุกตั้งถิ่นฐานเนี่ยทั่วโลกกว่า1 ใน 4ของจำนวนบทความที่ตีพิมพ์ทั้งหมดพุ่งเป้าไปที่เรื่องเดียวครับคือเรื่องปาเลสไตน์และอิสราเอลทำไมถึงเป็นแบบนั้นเพราะที่นี่เปรียบเสมือนห้องแลบขนาดใหญ่ที่สุดในการศึกษาว่าอาณานิคมที่ยังมีชีวิตอยู่ในศตวรรษปัจจุบันนั้นมันทำงานยังไงประเด็นสำคัญของผมที่อยากท้าทายความเข้าใจเดิมฮะชื่อที่ผมเรียกว่าอิสราเอลแล้วหลายท่านที่ไม่ใช่ในทางวิชาการนะครับก็จะเห็นว่าผมเรียกอีกชื่อหนึ่งว่ารัฐเถื่อนไซออนิสต์เนี่ยที่เรียกแบบนั้นก็ไม่ใช่ด้วยอารมณ์หรือว่าแพชชั่นแต่เพื่อจะนิยามว่าอิสราเอลนั้นไม่ใช่แค่รัฐชาติทั่วไปแต่อิสราเอลนั้นมีอีกฐานะหนึ่งคือเป็น settler project เป็นโครงการของการรุกตั้งถิ่นฐานของผู้มาใหม่หรือโครงการล่าอาณานิคมเพื่อเข้าตั้งถิ่นฐานแทนที่ด้วยกระบวนการมากมายที่มันเถื่อนมันผิดต่อกฎหมายระหว่างประเทศความเถื่อนดังกล่าวเนี่ยมันดำเนินการผ่านการจัดระเบียบสังคมใหม่อย่างน้อยผ่าน3 แกนหลักคือการตั้งถิ่นฐานถาวรการยึดที่ดินและการปรับโครงสร้างพื้นที่ขอย้ำคำของวอล์ฟอีกสักครั้งนะครับว่า this kind of invasion is a structure not an event ทุกท่านเห็นเหตุการณ์นักบาในปี 1948 ไหมครับสำหรับคนทั่วไปเนี่ยเราอาจจะมองว่านั่นคืองานที่เราจัดรำลึกขึ้นทุกปีเพื่อตอกย้ำโศกนาฏกรรมที่เกิดขึ้นในอดีตอาจจะเป็นหน้าหนึ่งในประวัติศาสตร์แต่สำหรับกรอบเลนสายตาของวิชาการสาย SCS Settler Colonial Study เนี่ยนักบาคือสิ่งที่ยังไม่จบเราเรียกสิ่งนี้ว่า ongoing นักบาคือมันเกิดขึ้นอยู่ตลอดเวลามาจนถึงปัจจุบันกำแพงแบ่งแยกดินแดนภายในเวสต์แบงก์ถนนบายพาสซึ่งออกแบบมาเพื่อเชื่อมนิคมชาวยิวโดยไม่ผ่านพื้นที่ชาวปาเลสไตน์และเป็นเครื่องมือสำคัญในการแบ่งแยกพื้นที่หรือการบังคับให้พลัดถิ่นอย่างเป็นระบบทั้งหมดนี้คือหลักฐานรูปธรรมของตรรกะแห่งการขจัดให้สิ้นและ ongoing นักบาที่ยังดำเนินต่อไปอยู่เป็นระยะเพื่อลบตัวตนของชาวปาเลสไตน์ออกไปจากแผนที่และการจดจำของโลกให้ได้ในท้ายที่สุดแง่มุมที่น่าสนใจคือ argument หนึ่งจากงานเมื่อปีที่แล้วนี่เองของล็อกเกอร์แอนด์บิเลสกี้นะครับล็อกเกอร์บิเลสกี้เสนอว่าสิ่งที่อิสราเอลทำนั้นที่จริงแล้วเนี่ยมันไม่ใช่แค่การล่าอาณานิคมรุกตั้งถิ่นฐานแบบเคสอื่นละแต่มันคือส่วนผสมระหว่างการล่าอาณานิคมกับการสร้างจักรวรรดิหมายถึงการสร้างอาณานิคมที่บริสุทธิ์หมดจดเป็นเพียวโคโลนีขึ้นจนสุดท้ายอาณานิคมนี้แข็งแกร่งในตัวเองพอที่จะเป็นรัฐแม่ขึ้นมาใหม่ได้ด้วยตนเองไม่ต้องพึ่งพาจักรวรรดิอื่นอีกต่อไปและถ้าทุกคนตามข่าวล่าสุดที่เนทันยาฮูเนี่ยเปิดเผยถึงเป้าหมายที่จะดำรงระบบความมั่นคงของประเทศตัวเองโดยลดการพึ่งพาของอเมริกาและชาติตะวันตกลงนั้นก็พอจะคล้อยตามกับ argument ข้อนี้ได้เมื่อปีที่แล้วนะครับทีนี้นะครับในเหตุการณ์ที่มันเกิดขึ้นในปาเลสไตน์เนี่ยผมอยากจะชวนดูว่าในแต่ละเคสถ้าเราจำแนกออกเป็น3พื้นที่ใหญ่คือเวสต์แบงก์กาซาและกล่าวเจาะจงไปที่อีสต์เยรูซาเล็มเนี่ยมันมีนวัตกรรมมีรายละเอียดที่แตกต่างกันบางประการที่น่าศึกษานะครับเริ่มจากที่เวสต์แบงก์ครับถ้าทุกท่านจะดูว่าอาณานิคมรุกตั้งถิ่นฐานทำงานอย่างไรในเชิงกายภาพก็ขอให้มองไปที่นี่เป็นที่แรกได้เลยนะครับเพราะที่นี่เนี่ยคือพื้นที่ที่ถูกออกแบบมาให้แตกกระจายแตกละเอียดอย่างเป็นระบบอิสราเอลใช้เทคนิคการปกครองแบบแบ่งแยกครับโดยเฉพาะพื้นที่ C ซึ่งมีขนาดใหญ่ที่สุดและสำคัญที่สุดพวกเขาจึงควบคุมที่นั่นเบ็ดเสร็จเพื่อสร้างนิคมตั้งถิ่นฐานของชาวอิสราเอลขึ้นทุกท่านลองนึกภาพนะครับมีถนนที่คนปาเลสไตน์ใช้ไม่ได้มีกำแพงที่ตัดผ่านหมู่บ้านมีจุดตรวจอีกนับร้อยจุด นักวิชาการนะครับอย่างฟาร่าและคณะนะครับก็ผลิตงานออกมาเมื่อปีที่แล้วเช่นกันเนี่ยเรียกสิ่งเหล่านี้ว่า apartheid structures หรือโครงสร้างของการแบ่งแยกกลุ่มชนชาติซึ่งกักขังชาวปาเลสไตน์ไว้ในพื้นที่ไข่แดงเล็กๆที่ถูกตัดขาดจากกันอยู่ในวงล้อมจนไม่สามารถรวมตัวกันเป็นหน่วยทางการเมืองที่เข้มแข็งได้ความน่าสนใจอยู่ที่การใช้วาทกรรมครับผู้ตั้งถิ่นฐานหัวรุนแรงและพลเมืองชาวอิสราเอลที่เป็นชาตินิยมสุดโต่งจะไม่เรียกที่นี่ว่าเวสต์แบงก์แต่จะเรียกว่ายูเดียแอนด์ซามาเรียทำไมต้องเปลี่ยนชื่อก็เพื่อเป็นการชุบตัวจากผู้รุกรานให้กลายเป็นผู้ทวงคืนตามสิทธิ์การใช้ชื่อแบบนี้ในคัมภีร์ไบเบิลมาทับชื่อในประวัติศาสตร์สมัยใหม่คือการใช้ตรรกะของการเข้ามาแทนที่อย่างสมบูรณ์แบบและอีกสภาพการหนึ่งที่อยากให้สังเกตก็คือการใช้คำที่ท่าน Professor ปัปเป้ได้พูดมาแล้วคือเรื่อง security หรือความมั่นคงความมั่นคงก็เป็นอีกชุดวาทกรรมที่การรุกล่าอาณานิคมเพื่อตั้งถิ่นฐานนั้นนำมาใช้เป็นเกราะกำบังการกระทำของตัวเองอิสราเอลจำไม่ได้บอกว่าฉันอยากยึดดินแดนอย่างตรงไปตรงมานะฮะแต่พวกเขามักอ้างว่าที่เนี่ยคือพื้นที่ที่จำเป็นต้องเข้าควบคุมเพื่อสร้างความลึกเชิงดินแดนซึ่งเป็นศัพท์ทางยุทธศาสตร์การรบ territorial depth นะฮะคือการที่มองว่านะครับถ้าศูนย์กลางอำนาจมีระยะห่างจากชายแดนน้อยเกินไปความลึกที่ไม่ลึกดังกล่าวนี้คือภัยคุกคามความมั่นคงดังนั้นในทางการทหารเนี่ยยุทธศาสตร์การรบจึงจำเป็นจะต้องขยายดินแดนไม่ว่าจะในรูปแบบ buffer zone non-military zone หรืออย่างใดก็แล้วแต่นะครับขณะเดียวกันเนี่ยก็มักจะมีข้อกล่าวอ้างว่าถ้าพื้นที่อย่างเวสต์แบงก์นั้นมีการอนุญาตให้ทางฝั่งของปาเลสไตน์ปกครองได้โดยสมบูรณ์ที่นี่ก็อาจจะกลายเป็นสิ่งที่เขาเรียกเป็นศัพท์แสลงว่าฮามาสฐานก็ดินแดนของฮามาสนะฮะวาทกรรมนี้ทำงานร่วมกันกับภาพลักษณ์ของนักรบผู้ชอบธรรมคือการยกย่องทหารและผู้ตั้งถิ่นฐานชาวยิวว่าไม่ได้เป็นผู้ลุกรานแต่เป็นผู้พิทักษ์ชนชาติบ้านเกิดทำให้ความรุนแรงและการขยายดินแดนเป็นเรื่องที่เข้าใจได้และเป็นหน้าที่ซะด้วยซ้ำในการปกป้องชนชาติของตัวเองเวสต์แบงก์จึงเป็นตัวอย่างนะครับของการใช้เครื่องมือทั้งกำลังทหารทั้งกฎหมายรวมถึงปลายปากกาผ่านการประดิษฐ์วาทกรรมขึ้นอย่างสอดประสานกันเพื่อบรรลุเป้าหมายของการล่าอาณานิคมรุกตั้งถิ่นฐานขณะที่ถ้าเวสต์แบงก์เนี่ยสะท้อนกลยุทธ์เช่นว่านะคือการแบ่งแยกพื้นที่จัดโซนนิ่งเพื่อปกครองกรณีของกาซาก็สะท้อนเป็นตัวอย่างที่ชัดถึงอีกเทคนิควิธีหนึ่งก็คือการกักกันเพื่อขจัดให้สิ้นนับตั้งแต่ปี 1948 นะฮะอิสราเอลเนี่ยเริ่มต้นมองดินแดนแถบกาซาว่าเป็นเสมือน warehouse of refugees เป็นโกดังที่เอาไว้เก็บผู้ลี้ภัยนะที่ถูกขับไล่มาจากส่วนอื่นของปาเลสไตน์เพื่อไม่ให้คนเหล่านี้กลับไปทวงสิทธิ์ในดินแดนของโครงการตั้งถิ่นฐานไซออนิสต์หลายคนอาจถามว่าอ้าวแล้วอิสราเอลเนี่ยได้ถอนนิคมออกจากกาซาถอนตัวออกจากกาซาตั้งแต่ปี 2005 แล้วไม่ใช่หรือแล้วจะเป็นอาณานิคมได้ยังไงคำตอบอย่างรวบรัดนะครับคือรีโมทคอนโทรลแม้จะไม่มีผู้ตั้งถิ่นฐานอยู่ในนั้นแต่อิสราเอลใช้วิธีการบล็อกเขตปิดล้อมอย่างเบ็ดเสร็จควบคุมทุกหยดน้ำทุกแคลอรี่ของอาหารและทุกสัญญาณอินเทอร์เน็ตที่จะเข้าไปในดินแดนกาซาปรากฏการณ์นี้ครับมันทำให้เคสที่กาซาเจอนั้นมันเป็นจุดบรรจบกันของการบังคับให้พลัดถิ่นแต่ขณะเดียวกันก็บังคับให้หยุดอยู่กับที่ด้วยซึ่งด้านหนึ่งเนี่ยคือการขับไล่ประชากรและการโจมตีซ้ำแล้วซ้ำเล่าแต่อีกด้านหนึ่งก็คือการปิดล้อมอย่างเข้มงวดเพื่อไม่ให้มีการเคลื่อนย้ายทางประชากรสิ่งนี้จึงเป็นภาวะที่มันค่อนข้างลักกะลั่นที่ถูกบังคับให้ออกจากบ้านแต่ก็ถูกกักขังไม่ให้ออกไปไหนได้อีกด้วยทำให้หลายคนนะฮะรวมถึงท่านอาจารย์สราวุธด้วยก็มักจะเรียกว่ากาซานั้นเปรียบเสมือนคุกเปิดที่ใหญ่ที่สุดในโลกสิ่งที่เกิดขึ้นในกาซา ถ้าเรานับก่อนตุลาคม 2023 เนี่ยมันจึงเป็นสิ่งที่เราเรียกกันว่า slow violence หรือความรุนแรงที่มันเกิดขึ้นซ้ำแล้วซ้ำเล่าแต่อย่างค่อยเป็นค่อยไปคือการทำลายระบบสาธารณสุขทำลายโครงสร้างพื้นฐานทำให้ชีวิตของคนปาเลสไตน์ใกล้สภาวะที่เรียกว่า non life หรือการมีชีวิตที่เสมือนตายทั้งเป็นกระบวนการที่ทำมาอย่างต่อเนื่องนับทศวรรษนี้ถือได้ว่าเป็น slow motion genocide ฮะเป็นการทำลายกลุ่มประชากรอย่างต่อเนื่องค่อยเป็นค่อยไปผ่านการปิดล้อมและตัดทรัพยากรพื้นฐานแต่พอเข้าสู่ตุลาคมปี 2023 เป็นต้นมาเราเห็นอีกปรากฏการณ์หนึ่งที่ในงานวิชาการสาย SCS อีกเช่นเดียวกันเนี่ยเรียกคำว่า herbicide นะฮะก็มาจาก genocide บวกกับ urban herbicide เนี่ยคือการพินาศกรรมเมืองนะฮะคำนี้จริงๆแล้วเริ่มใช้กันแพร่หลายครั้งแรกในกรณีสงครามซาราเจโวนะฮะหมายถึงการทำลายเมืองอย่างเป็นระบบเพื่อให้ชีวิตอยู่ต่อไม่ได้มันคือการจงใจทำลายความเป็นเมืองทำลายมหาวิทยาลัยสถานศึกษาโรงพยาบาลที่อยู่อาศัยเพื่อไม่ให้พื้นที่นั้นสามารถกลับมาเป็นบ้านของใครได้อีกต่อไปและสุดท้ายที่น่าสนใจมากนะครับแล้วมันดูสอดรับกับวิชั่น 2025 ด้วยคือข้อเสนอของเนทันยาฮูที่ว่ากาซา 2035 ลองคิดตามนะครับในขณะที่กำลังถล่มกาซาอยู่ทางฝั่งรัฐบาลอิสราเอลก็เสนอแผนพัฒนาพื้นที่ขึ้นมาใหม่โดยอ้างว่าเป็นข้อเสนอแผนพัฒนาเศรษฐกิจและการฟื้นฟูฉนวนกาซาหลังสงครามเชื่อมต่อโครงสร้างพื้นฐานไปยังซาอุดีอาระเบียพวกนั้นแต่ในกรอบคิดแบบ SCS ที่ผมชวนทุกท่านพิจารณาตั้งแต่ต้นเนี่ยแผนนี้ถูกตั้งข้อสงสัยว่าเป็น eraser through development มันคือการลบตัวตนปาเลสไตน์ทิ้งแล้วสร้างขึ้นใหม่ด้วยกระบวนการพัฒนาเพื่อให้เป็นพื้นที่เศรษฐกิจใหม่สำหรับการลงทุนข้อเสนอแผนนี้เนี่ยถ้าทำสำเร็จจะถือว่าเป็นขั้นสุดยอดของตรรกะในการเข้าแทนที่เพราะโครงสร้างทางทุนโครงสร้างทางเศรษฐกิจการเมืองทุกอย่างจะถูกปรับแล้วเปลี่ยนให้เป็นแบบใหม่ทั้งหมดจนไม่เหลือร่องรอยเขาโครงเดิมด้วยหลายประการที่กล่าวมานะฮะกาซาจึงเป็นตัวอย่างที่ชัดเจนที่สุดของปรากฏการณ์ที่นักวิชาการหลายคนนิยามว่าเป็นกาซาไซด์จีโนไซด์บวกกาซาคือการฆ่าล้างเผ่าพันธุ์อย่างเป็นระบบที่เป็นส่วนหนึ่งของโครงสร้างอาณานิคมซึ่งต้องการยึดดินแดนอย่างเบ็ดเสร็จนั่นเองประการถัดมานะครับถ้าเราเจาะดูเฉพาะไปยังพื้นที่เยรูซาเล็มตะวันออกนะก็จะสะท้อนเห็นชัดถึงจุดเด่นอีกแบบหนึ่งของการใช้เครื่องมือทางกฎหมายและโฉนดที่ดินเป็นเครื่องมือสำคัญของการยึดครองที่นี่ครับสะท้อนปรากฏการณ์ที่เราเรียกว่า legalized displacement หรือการขับไล่โดยอ้างความชอบธรรมทางกฎหมายและกระบวนการทำให้พื้นที่นั้นกลายเป็นยิวหรือ Judaization โดยตามกฎหมายระหว่างประเทศที่ที่นี่เนี่ยถือเป็นพื้นที่ที่ถูกยึดครองนะครับแต่ในทางปฏิบัติเนี่ยเราจะเห็นว่าอิสราเอลได้ประกาศผนวกดินแดนและบังคับใช้กฎหมายภายในประเทศของตนเข้าไปบริหารจัดการอย่างเต็มรูปแบบแล้วลองดูเคสนะครับบางชุมชนเช่นย่านซิลวานนะที่อยู่ในงานศึกษาหลายชิ้นนะฮะองค์กรผู้ตั้งถิ่นฐานเนี่ยไปขุดเอากฎหมายสมัยออตโตมันมาสู้เพื่ออ้างสิทธิ์การยึดคืนที่ดินแต่สิ่งที่ย้อนแย้งคือชาวปาเลสไตน์ที่อาศัยอยู่ในย่านนั้นส่วนใหญ่คือผู้ลี้ภัยจากสงครามที่อิสราเอลก่อขึ้นในการสร้างรัฐเมื่อปี 1947-1948 อยู่แล้วเมื่อเขาถูกไล่ที่อีกครั้งสภาพการนี้จึงเกิดสิ่งที่เรียกว่า double displacement หรือการถูกทำให้พลัดถิ่นซ้ำเป็นครั้งที่สองการกระทำของอิสราเอลในเยรูซาเล็มตะวันออกไม่ได้ใช้ปืนนะฮะไม่ได้ใช้ระเบิดเป็นอาวุธที่สำคัญที่สุดแต่มีผังเมืองเป็นอาวุธกลไกที่แนบเนียนที่สุดคือผังเมืองรวมนะซึ่งโดยปกติเราก็คงจะเคยได้ยินนะในประเทศไทยเราก็ใช้ในหลายพื้นที่ผังเมืองรวมโดยปกติเราใช้เพื่อแบ่งกำหนดโซนต่างๆออกเป็นสี สำหรับความเหมาะสมในการพัฒนาและใช้สอยตามสภาพพื้นที่นั้นๆที่มีความแตกต่างกันแต่กรณีนี้เนี่ยอิสราเอลกำหนดให้พื้นที่ที่มีคนปาเลสไตน์อยู่เป็นพื้นที่สีเขียวหมายถึงพื้นที่อนุรักษ์เพื่อไม่ให้เขาขอใบอนุญาตก่อสร้างบ้านได้เมื่อขอก่อสร้างไม่ได้แต่ครอบครัวใหญ่ขึ้นชาวปาเลสไตน์ก็ต้องแอบสร้างในบ้านของตัวเองพอสร้างเสร็จรัฐอิสราเอลก็สั่งรื้อถอนด้วยข้อหาก่อสร้างโดยผิดกฎหมายเห็นไหมฮะว่าระบบมันถูกออกแบบมาให้คนกลุ่มหนึ่งโตไม่ได้อยู่ไม่ได้และต้องย้ายออกไปเองในท้ายที่สุดในขณะที่สนับสนุนการสร้างย่านที่พักอาศัยสำหรับชาวยิวเท่านั้นยิ่งไปกว่านั้นนะฮะในเขตโอซิตี้หรือเขตเมืองเก่าก็มีการใช้นโยบายอย่างเป็นระบบเพื่อยึดทรัพย์และลบเลือนมรดกทางวัฒนธรรมของอิสลามและคริสต์ผ่านกฎหมายหลายฉบับอย่างเช่นกฎหมายทรัพย์สินของผู้ไม่อยู่หรือเราเรียกภาษาเขาว่า absentee property law นะครับโดยมีเป้าหมายสุดท้ายคือการทำให้เมืองเนี่ยมันว่างเปล่าไปจากประชากรปาเลสไตน์หนึ่งในประเด็นที่น่าสะเทือนใจที่สุดนะครับคือประเด็นที่ว่าด้วย unchilding หรือกระบวนการพรากความเป็นเด็กหรือความไร้เดียงสาไปจากเด็กในเยรูซาเล็มตะวันออกเด็กปาเลสไตน์จะถูกสอดแนมถูกจับกุมและถูกปฏิบัติเสมือนเป็นภัยคุกคามความมั่นคงตั้งแต่อายุยังน้อยจนสภาวะความเป็นเด็กถูกพรากไปจากพวกเขาและนี่คือเทคนิคหนึ่งของอาณานิคมเพื่อทำลายจิตวิญญาณของคนรุ่นต่อไปเราลองมาดูภาพนะครับหลังจากดูแต่ละเคสแล้วลองดูถอยออกมาดูภาพใหญ่ในเชิงเปรียบเทียบนะทั้ง3กรณีนี้อยากจะให้ท่านดูตารางเปรียบเทียบยุทธศาสตร์หลักที่อิสราเอลใช้ใน3พื้นที่ดังกล่าวนะครับกรณีเวสต์แบงค์เนี่ยหลักๆคือใช้การขยายผ่านโครงข่ายนิคมที่ตัดแผ่นดินให้เป็นชิ้นเล็กชิ้นน้อยกรณีกาซาเน้นไปที่การใช้การกักกันและทำลายผ่านการปิดล้อมกรณีเยรูซาเล็มตะวันออกใช้การผนวกดินแดนกลืนกินและลบเลือนผ่านการยึดสิทธิ์ที่อยู่อาศัยแต่ทุกท่านก็จะเห็นว่าเป้าหมายสุดท้ายเนี่ยมันคือเรื่องเดียวกันคือการสร้าง apartheid-like system ระบบของการแบ่งแยกคนบนผืนแผ่นดินเดียวกันที่มีชนชาติแตกต่างกันให้มีสิทธิ์อย่างไม่เท่าเทียมกันโดยสิ้นเชิงโดยมีชาวยิวอิสราเอลอยู่บนยอดพีระมิดและชาวปาเลสไตน์ในแต่ละพื้นที่ถูกกดทับด้วยเทคนิคที่ต่างกันออกไปคนในกาซาถูกขังคนในเวสต์แบงค์ถูกตัดแบ่งและคนในเยรูซาเล็มตะวันออกถูกทำให้อยู่อย่างไร้สิทธิ์การมองปัญหาปาเลสไตน์เป็นจุดเป็นกรณีหรือเป็นครั้งคราวจึงจะทำให้เราหลงประเด็นนะฮะเราต้องมองมันเป็น continuous colonial structure หรือโครงสร้างของอาณานิคมที่ดำเนินอยู่อย่างต่อเนื่องมีชีวิตในตนเองของมันนับตั้งแต่ปี 1948 มาจนถึงวินาทีที่เรานั่งกันอยู่ในห้องนี้ดังนั้นคำว่า from river to the sea ในบริบทของการบรรยายที่ผมนำเสนอชวนทุกท่านคิดเนี่ยนะครับจึงหมายถึงความพยายามสถาปนาอำนาจอธิปไตยของชาวยิวแต่เพียงผู้เดียวเหนือดินแดนทั้งหมดจากแม่น้ำจอร์แดนจนถึงทะเลเมดิเตอร์เรเนียนโดยใช้ตรรกะแห่งการขจัดให้สิ้นหรือ logic of elimination เพื่อสลายพลังทางการเมืองของชาวปาเลสไตน์ให้หมดสิ้นไป From river to the sea ในบริบทนี้ก็คือหัวใจแกนกลางเชิงพื้นที่ของ Greater Israel Vision ที่อิสราเอลมุ่งหมายจะบรรลุให้จงได้สำหรับตัว Greater Israel Vision เนี่ยนะครับสำหรับผมแล้วเนี่ยผมลองพยายามศึกษาดูงานทางวิชาการพบว่ายังไม่ได้มีการพูดถึงมากนักยกเว้นในวาทะในทางการเมืองและการสื่อสารมวลชนนะครับแต่จากการพิจารณาปฏิบัติการจริงของมันแล้วพบว่าวิชั่นนี้เป็นเสมือนเข็มทิศทางภูมิรัฐศาสตร์ที่อิสราเอลใช้ขับเคลื่อนรัฐในปัจจุบันนะโดยขยายอิทธิพลรวมถึงดินแดนออกไปมากกว่าเส้นที่กำหนดในปี 1947-1948 ทุกท่านลองเปิด Google Map แล้วดู ขออภัยฮะ ลองดูแผนที่ของอิสราเอลดูนะฮะจะเห็นว่าพื้นที่ตรงกลางเนี่ยค่อนข้างแคบมากนักยุทธศาสตร์ทางทหารของพวกเขาจึงบอกว่าเราไม่มีที่ให้ถอย no strategic depth ไม่มีความลึกเชิงยุทธศาสตร์ดังนั้นจึงเกิดสิ่งที่เรียกว่า forward defense ขึ้นคือการขยับเขตแนวป้องกันออกไปนอกพรมแดนสากลเพื่อสร้างความลึกเชิงพื้นที่อันเป็นหลักสำคัญทางยุทธศาสตร์การรบเพื่อป้องกันประเทศผ่านการเพิ่มระยะห่างระหว่างศูนย์กลางอำนาจกับพรมแดนจึงไปสร้างเขตกันชนในกาซาไปสร้างบัฟเฟอร์โซนในเลบานอนตอนใต้และซีเรียตอนใต้ที่ราบสูงโกลานเป้าหมายทางการทหารคือการไปหยุดศัตรูบนแผ่นดินของศัตรูเองนี่คือข้ออ้างครับเกี่ยวกับความจำเป็นทางทหารความจำเป็นทางความมั่นคงแต่ถ้าเรามองจากกรอบเรนของการล่าอาณานิคมรุกตั้งถิ่นฐานกรอบแนวคิดบนฐานสำนักนี้จะชวนเราพิจารณาเรื่องนี้ในภาพที่ต่างออกไปโดยจะชวนให้เรามองว่าเหตุผลด้านความมั่นคงมันเป็นเสมือนประตูบานแรกเท่านั้นที่เปิดออกไปจากการกำหนดเขตทหารไปสู่การประกาศพื้นที่ที่เป็นเขตอันตรายห้ามคนเข้าแล้วขยายดินแดนริบอำนาจอธิปไตยในท้ายที่สุดโดยใช้เช่นกาซาโมเดลคือการรื้อถอนอาคารบ้านเรือนให้ราบเป็นหน้ากลองจนกลายเป็นเศษซากเพื่อให้มั่นใจว่ากลุ่มชนที่เคยอยู่เดิมจะไม่มีวันกลับมาอยู่ที่บ้านของพวกเขาได้อีกจากนั้นก็เปลี่ยนสถานะกฎหมายพอกลายเป็นพื้นที่ว่างเปล่ารัฐก็ประกาศให้ที่ดินนั้นเป็นที่ดินรัฐหรือเขตอนุรักษ์ธรรมชาติหรือสุดแล้วแต่เพื่อใช้เครื่องมือทางกฎหมายขับไล่และปิดกั้นการกลับเข้ามาของคนพื้นเมืองอย่างถาวร Greater Israel นะฮะจึงเป็นจุดบรรจบกันอย่างลงตัวระหว่างความจำเป็นทางทหารกับความปรารถนาในการขยายดินแดนหรือที่งานวิชาการเช่นที่ผมอ้างถึงเมื่อ2 สไลด์ที่แล้วเรียกว่าระหว่างการล่าอาณานิคมกับการต้องการสร้างจักรวรรดิจากเขตกันชนในวันนี้ก็จะกลายเป็นนิคมของผู้ตั้งถิ่นฐานในวันหน้าได้ไม่ยากและกลายเป็นอธิปไตยถาวรในท้ายที่สุดได้ไม่ยากเช่นกันถ้าตามแผนนี่ก็จะเป็นวิธีที่อิสราเอลนั้นจะเปลี่ยนภูมิศาสตร์ของเอเชียตะวันตกไปอย่างสิ้นเชิงวิสัยทัศน์นี้กำลังพยายามเปลี่ยนพื้นที่จากแม่น้ำจอร์แดนไปจนถึงทะเลเมดิเตอร์เรเนียนและอาจเลยไปกว่านั้นให้กลายเป็นหน่วยการเมืองเดียวกันภายใต้การครอบงำของอิสราเอลโดยใช้สิ่งที่เราเรียกว่าสถาปัตยกรรมหรือวิศวกรรมทางกฎหมายและการบริหารปกครองมาทำให้การยึดครองแบบเถื่อนกลายเป็นแบบถูกกฎหมายในพื้นที่ที่ขยายกว้างออกไปกว่าปาเลสไตน์ที่เราพิจารณากันอยู่เนี่ยสภาพการโดยเฉพาะหลังสงครามระหว่างอเมริกาอิสราเอลกับอิหร่านตั้งแต่28 กุมภาพันธ์เป็นต้นมาปรากฏชัดถึงความน่ากังวลในการขยายตัวของการล่าอาณานิคมรูปแบบนี้นะผมขอชวนดูทีละพื้นที่นะครับในกรณีของเลบานอนตอนใต้เนี่ยนะฮะทุกท่านลองดูสิ่งที่เรียกว่า yellow line หรือว่าเส้นสีเหลืองเนี่ยนะครับสิ่งนี้มันไม่ใช่แค่เส้นสมมุติในแผนที่ทหารเพื่อทำทางยุทธวิธีการรบเท่านั้นแต่มันคือการผนวกพื้นที่เข้าเป็นเขตความมั่นคงล่วงหน้าหมายความว่าเส้นนี้นะครับมันตัดพื้นที่ออกมาทำให้อิสราเอลเนี่ยกำลังจะความหมายโดยพื้นที่ไหนก็คือกำลังยึดครองพื้นที่กว่า 6% ของประเทศเลบานอนทำไมต้องทำขนาดนั้นในทางทหารนะฮะทางอิสราเอลก็อ้างว่าเพื่อสร้างระยะห่างระหว่างกลุ่มฮิซบอลเลาะห์กับชุมชนทางตอนเหนือของรัฐอิสราเอลแต่ประเด็นที่น่าสนใจคือปฏิบัติการต่อพื้นที่นี้ที่เรียกว่า Silver Plow อันเป็นปฏิบัติการทางทหารที่อิสราเอลดำเนินการรื้อถอนและทำลายหมู่บ้านหรือโครงสร้างพื้นฐานในเลบานอนตอนใต้มากกว่า20หมู่บ้าน20ชุมชนในปฏิบัติการนี้ทุกท่านสังเกตไหมฮะว่าทำไมต้องดำเนินการขนาดนั้นเช่นทำไมต้องทำลายสะพานข้ามแม่น้ำลิทานีทำไมต้องทำลายแผงโซลาร์เซลล์หรือระบบประปาคุ้นไหมฮะเพราะการกระทำเหล่านี้ไม่ใช่แค่มุ่งเป้าหมายทางการทหารเหมือนที่กล่าวอ้างมันสะท้อนชัดอย่างชัดเจนว่าเป็นยุทธศาสตร์การทำให้พื้นที่นั้นอยู่ต่อไม่ได้อีกเมื่อไม่มีน้ำไม่มีไฟไม่มีทางคมนาคมคนที่หนีภัยสงครามไปแล้วก็จะไม่สามารถกลับมาใช้ชีวิตได้อีกนี่คือกาซาโมเดลฮะ ผลลัพธ์ดังกล่าวทำให้เราเรียกการกระทำของอิสราเอลต่อเลบานอนตอนใต้ได้ว่าเป็นการทำให้ขจัดประชากรออกไปอย่างเป็นระบบหรือ systematic depopulation บ้านเรือนเกือบ 30,000 หลังนะครับที่ถูกทำลายมันไม่ใช่ความเสียหายที่เป็นผลกระทบข้างเคียงที่พลเรือนเจอจากสงครามแต่มันเป็นสิ่งที่เกิดขึ้นอย่างจงใจเป็นยุทธศาสตร์เดียวกันกับที่เราเห็นในกาซาและเวสต์แบงก์มันคือการทำให้เจ้าของที่เดิมพลัดถิ่นอย่างถาวรเพื่อให้พื้นที่นั้นกลายเป็นพื้นที่ว่างซึ่งอิสราเอลจะสามารถควบคุมได้อย่างเป็นเสร็จกรณีเลบานอนตอนใต้จึงเป็นสิ่งที่ตอกย้ำว่าตรรกะแห่งการขจัดให้สิ้นเนี่ยมันสามารถถูกนำไปประยุกต์ใช้ได้ทุกที่ที่รัฐอิสราเอลมองว่าเป็นภัยคุกคามหรือพื้นที่ยุทธศาสตร์จากเขตกันชนชั่วคราวสู่การทำลายโครงสร้างพื้นฐานถาวรและจบลงด้วยการเปลี่ยนแปลงแผนที่ทางภูมิรัฐศาสตร์นี่คือสิ่งที่เรียกว่า spatial restructuring หรือการปรับโครงสร้างของพื้นที่เพื่อสถาปนาอำนาจอธิปไตยใหม่เหนือดินแดนสำหรับถัดมาคือกรณีของซีเรียตอนใต้นะฮะในกรณีซีเรียตอนใต้เนี่ยมันผ่านเป็นการดำเนินการที่เราเรียกกันว่า frontier encroachment นะครับหรือการรุกล้ำแนวพรมแดนถ้าย้อนกลับไปปี 1974 หลังสงครามยมคิปปูเนี่ยเราจะเห็นว่ามันมีเส้นหยุดยิงของ UNTOF นะครับก็คือกองกำลังสังเกตการณ์ของ UN ที่กำหนดนะฮะเส้นในการเป็นข้อตกลงระหว่างทางฝั่งซีเรียกับโอเคโดนแจ้งเวลามานะครับขออนุญาตไปต่ออย่างเร็วๆนะฮะถ้าเราย้อนกลับไปปี 1974 มันมีเส้นนะครับที่เป็นข้อตกลงที่สามารถรักษาสภาวะสงบมาได้นานพอสมควรแต่สังเกตไหมฮะเมื่ออำนาจรัฐภายในของซีเรียอ่อนแอลงเนี่ยอิสราเอลก็จะใช้โอกาสนี้ข้ามเส้นดังกล่าวโดยนำกองกำลังภาคพื้นดินบุกเข้าไปล่าสุดก็ที่จังหวัดดาราอานะครับแล้วก็กูเนตานะครับนับร้อยครั้งแม้จะอ้างเหตุผลความจำเป็นด้านความมั่นคงอีกเช่นกันแต่กระบวนการที่เริ่มจากที่ราบสูงโกลานจากก่อนมาสู่ซีเรียตอนใต้ล่าสุดมันสะท้อนถึงการผนวกดินแดนแบบคืบคลานช้าๆสิ่งนี้คือ de facto annexation หรือการผนวกดินแดนโดยพฤตินัยผ่านการที่อิสราเอลเนี่ยไม่ได้เข้าไปแล้วถอยออกแต่เข้าไปแล้วปักหลักโดยยึดจุดยุทธศาสตร์บนที่ราบสูงสร้างป้อมปราการและที่สำคัญคือยึดที่ดินเกษตรกรรมของชาวซีเรียด้วยเห็นไหมครับว่ายุทธวิธีมันเหมือนกับในเวสต์แบงก์คือการค่อยๆเปลี่ยนพื้นที่ของคนอื่นให้กลายเป็นพื้นที่ของตัวเองอย่างช้าๆขออนุญาตไปสู่ส่วนสรุปเลยละกันนะครับในเวลาที่จำกัดเราจึงเห็นว่าสิ่งที่อิสราเอลกำลังทำเนี่ยคือการ restructuring หรือการจัดระเบียบภูมิภาคใหม่ผ่านการทำให้รัฐรอบข้างนั้นแตกละเอียด fragmentation ขอสรุปความต่างของยุทธวิธีใน2แนวรบให้ชัดเจนนิดนึงนะครับคือสำหรับแนวรบเลบานอนเนี่ยเป้าหมายคือการกำหนดเส้นเหลืองหรือ yellow line เพื่อสร้างสภาพพื้นที่กันชนที่ตัดอธิปไตยของเลบานอนออกจากดินแดนของเลบานอนเองแล้วทำให้พื้นที่นั้นกลายเป็นเมืองร้างที่ไม่สามารถอยู่อาศัยได้ส่วนแนวรบซีเรียมีเป้าหมายคือการผนวกดินแดนแบบค่อยเป็นค่อยไปโดยใช้เทคโนโลยีขั้นสูงในการควบคุมพรมแดนและการยึดที่ดินเกษตรกรรมเพื่อขยายเขตความมั่นคงของที่ราบสูงโกลานให้กว้างออกไปอย่างถาวรทำไมต้องทำแบบนี้เพราะเราเห็นชัดแล้วว่าอิสราเอลกำลังฉวยใช้สภาวะรัฐล้มเหลวและเปราะบางของเพื่อนบ้านเมื่อดามัสกัสอ่อนแอเมื่อเบรุตเปราะบางเนี่ยอิสราเอลก็จะเข้าไปสร้างสุญญากาศความมั่นคงและผลที่ตามมาคืออะไรประเทศเหล่านี้ก็จะไม่สามารถรวมตัวกันเป็นแนวร่วมมาต่อต้านอิสราเอลได้อีกต่อไปเพราะทุกคนต้องห่วงพะวงอยู่กับการตั้งรับเฉพาะจุดในดินแดนตัวเองบทสรุปที่สำคัญที่สุดจากกรณีทั้งคู่นี้ก็คือว่า Greater Israel Vision นั้นมีฐานะเป็นอีกแบบหนึ่งนั่นคือ Active Geopolitical Process มันเป็นกระบวนการรังสรรค์ภูมิรัฐศาสตร์ที่เกิดขึ้นใหม่ทุกหมู่บ้านที่ถูกรื้อถอนในเลบานอนทุกเขตกันชนที่ลากใหม่ในซีเรียและทุกนิคมที่ขยับขยายออกไปในปาเลสไตน์มันคือกระบวนการเปลี่ยนสภาพเชิงภูมิรัฐศาสตร์ของภูมิภาคเพื่อสถาปนาอำนาจนำของอิสราเอลเหนือภูมิภาคเอเชียตะวันออกในระยะต่อไป ก็ขออนุญาตจบการบรรยายแต่เพียงเท่านี้ครับ
ขอบคุณ Dr. Atit ค่ะ Thank you very much, Dr. Atit Tongin, for your valuable insight and your lecture this afternoon. I believe Dr. Adisara would also like to give you a token of appreciation. I'm not sure where she is now. Maybe she will come back. In the meantime, our next session, we have a speaker who's joining us online. Dr. Adisara is here. If you would like to come forward and give Dr. Atit the token of appreciation. Round of applause for Dr. Atit Tongin, please. And joining us online today, a very special guest, Voice from Palestine. We have the special address on the topic of From Ethnic Cleansing to Genocide, the Risk of the Greater Israel Project for Regional and Global Peace and Stability. Joining us here today, Dr. Muslim Imran from the Asia Middle East Center for Research and Dialogue. Hello, Dr. Muslim, can you hear us?
Hello, good afternoon to you all. Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, please, you can begin with your session.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, and a very good afternoon to you all. I'm very pleased to join you in this discussion. I was hoping to be there in person, but thankfully we have the
Dr. Muslim, can you speak up a little bit?
Okay. Is it clear now?
Yes, yes, much better. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Again, I would like to thank you for this opportunity. I'm very glad to be joining your discussion, and I wish you the best, all the organizers and the audience in Chulalongkorn University, I believe. I'm very hopeful that this discussion will open our eyes to the unfolding situation in West Asia and the Middle East. So in my very brief presentation, I would like to highlight how Zionism has evolved from an exclusionist settler colonial ideology of ethno-nationalism into a more dangerous, destructive, expansionist force in West Asia and the Middle East that has led to instability and, of course, to the erasure of Palestinian life and to many, many harms. Now, it's important to highlight how the different forces of Zionism have led to this dangerous situation and how all of this impacted the Palestinian people. Over the last few decades, the Palestinians have undergone a process of ethnic cleansing, repeated genocides, and a lot of extremist policies by the Zionist movement. Some get confused who is the force behind this brutality happening against the Palestinians, while some would misrepresent the situation and claim it is Judaism. Others would say it's plain Zionist ideology. Some would, especially in recent years, would point fingers to the ultra-right-wing Zionist ideologies of revisionist Zionism and religious Zionism. I would like to start by making a distinction between these different forces. Judaism, to begin with, is one of the monotheistic Abrahamic faiths. It's a religion respected by all civilized people. It has roots in Palestine and the region at large. The Palestinians, be it Muslim or Christians, have always had good ties with the Jewish community that lived in Palestine and in the region for centuries. Of course, the Jewish community has lived in different eras of the Islamic empire across the Middle East. They were welcomed, taken care of, and protected by the different Islamic empires. So our problem is definitely not Judaism. The second group that we should highlight is the Zionist community or the Zionist ideology. Zionism is a political ideology. It's an extremist right-wing political ideology concerned with the establishment and maintenance of a Jewish political entity in Palestine. It emerged in Europe in the late 19th century, and it was successful in forcing out hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from their homeland in Palestine, and was successful in building a political entity that continues to expand its territories and influence over the years. The other group that we should touch on and highlight is the revisionist Zionist group, or the revisionist Zionist ideology. While Zionism has always been a problem for the Middle East, revisionist Zionism has become the more dangerous ideology and the more dangerous force in modern day Israel. Revisionist Zionism is a fascist right-wing political version of Zionism. It seeks to expand its territories and have control over both sides of the Jordan River. It adopts militarization and settler colonialism as its main tool, and the Likud party is a good manifestation of this extremist ideology. It was, of course, founded or proposed and promoted by Ze'ev Jabotinsky, one of the early days Zionist leaders in the 1920s. Another very dangerous form of Zionism is religious Zionism. And now, revisionist Zionism has been the problem for Palestine and West Asia for more than 2 decades. Although it dates back to, its political influence dates back to the 1970s, but it's become a serious problem since the coming of Benjamin Netanyahu to power in 1996 all the way until today. Israel has been run by one force or another from the revisionist Zionist camp since the year 2000 in particular. Now, religious Zionism is another very toxic, dangerous political force. They simply adhere to many of the revisionist Zionist ideas, but also add a flavor of messianic beliefs. They would like to establish a theocratic state in Palestine, ruled by the Torah, and expand their control across the region. These are the different ideas and ideologies that we have been grappling with for the past few years. They are the ones in charge in Israel, the religious and revisionist Zionists. And even though they are the ones leading the onslaught, but the root cause of the problem in West Asia is actually Zionism itself. I'll be very brief, but I would like to highlight that Zionism is not only a Jewish problem, it's not only Jewish Zionism, there is Christian Zionism, and today there is even Muslim Zionism. But Christian Zionism in particular has been one of the most dangerous political forces. It comes with a messianic.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Muslim Imran. Okay, he's returned now. Maybe a little bit of technical difficulties on the side.
Hello?
Hello, welcome back, sir.
Yeah, sorry for the technical glitch. I was saying that Zionism itself, as an extremist right-wing ideology, has been the problem that the region is struggling with for many decades. The Zionist ideology, be it Christian Zionism or Jewish Zionism, has led to wars of expansion, to genocide after genocide, to ethnic cleansing. And the ones who have been paying the price of all of this were, number one, the Palestinians, number two, the Arab populations around Palestine in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt, and number three, in more recent years, the people of the entire region in West Asia. These ideological forces have been promoting the idea of greater Israel. I believe many of the speakers today have discussed the dangers of this idea, but to make it plain and simple, the revisionist and the religious Zionist camps would like to expand the limits of their power as much as possible. Many of their leaders, including Minister Smotrich, even Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister himself, have alluded and sometimes have been very direct and blunt to their ambitions to expand from the Euphrates to the Nile and beyond. Countries like Kuwait, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Turkey to some extent, Egypt and Saudi Arabia will be directly affected by these ambitions. And the problem is that the current American administration of President Donald Trump is championing one version of Christian Zionism that would like to enable the Israeli state to achieve its political ambitions. We have seen several statements of the American ambassador to Israel, Huckabee, who openly has encouraged the Israeli leadership to look for expansion and hegemony. So when you look at the crisis in the Middle East, you see that right-wing Zionism has become a very, very toxic mix. Israel is seeking to become a superpower of some sort using colonial tools. It has a messianic vision. It practices fascist policies against the Palestinian people in the West Bank and Gaza, and especially against the Palestinians inside Israel. And at the same time, it is trying to expand the limits of its power by testing its weapons on the people of the region. When the former Syrian regime collapsed in December 2024, Israel was very quick to carry out hundreds of air strikes on Syria and destroy almost everything that the Syrian state had in terms of strategic capabilities.
Dr.
It has also...
Excuse me, sorry. We are kind of running out of time. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with? I'm very sorry.
Sure. Okay, to conclude, this is a dangerous political ideology that has caused misery to the region. My hope from the audience here in this discussion in Thailand is to try to curb this ideology and this political ambition by not giving any space to proponents of this extremist ideology. I'm very hopeful that you will continue your solidarity with the struggle of the Palestinians and the people of West Asia in general. And one day we will have a more peaceful West Asia, a more peaceful Middle East, and a peaceful and free Palestine with the support of everyone at your end and across the world. Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity, and looking forward to meet you in person sometimes soon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muslim Meron, for joining us here today. Next, we will hear from BDS Thailand on the topic of Thailand towards Thai solidarity, supporting the BDS movement in Thailand. And for those of you who are not too familiar with BDS, it's an organization aims towards the Palestinian liberation through boycotts, divestments, and sanctions against Israel. And our speaker here today, Ari, is an organizer with BDS Thailand with over a decade of experience in Palestinian solidarity movement. She spearheaded the youth movement and a campaign that successfully removed weapon manufacturer CEO Warren Candace from the board of Whitney Museum and passed a BDS resolution through the New York University student government. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ari.
Okay, thank you for this opportunity to present about our organizing work. So, next slide, please. I'll be very brief. The Boycotts, Divestments, and Sanctions, or BDS movement, was founded in 2005 by 172 Palestinian civil society organizations. It is a global Palestinian-led movement inspired by the South African anti-apartheid movement, which showed the world that when we refuse to do business as usual with an apartheid regime, we can end the apartheid. Next slide, please. So BDS has three clear demands based on international law. One, an end to Israel's occupation of all Arab lands and dismantling of the legal apartheid wall. Two, recognizing the fundamental rights of the Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel to full equality. Three, the right of return for Palestinian refugees. So let's briefly break down what boycotts, divestments, and sanctions mean. Next slide, please. So boycotts involve the collective withdrawal of support from Israel's regime and the companies or institutions that prop it up. The movement emphasizes targeted collective action for maximum impact. Next slide, please. So divestment refers to the practice of applying pressure to convince constitutions such as universities to withdraw their investments from corporations complicit in violations of international law. So rather than targeting individual consumers, we aim to cut the financial lifelines of the Israeli occupation of Palestine. For example, I organized a campaign at New York University to pass a BDS resolution through our student government in 2018, calling on the university to separate its interests from firms such as Lockheed Martin, General Electric, and Caterpillar Inc., which armed the US-Israeli war machine. Next slide, please. So sanctions are when people power is used to compel governments and international bodies to fulfill their legal obligations under international law. So these include military embargoes, which end all trade and transfer of weapons and military technology to and from Israel, trade restrictions, which end the preferential trade agreements or banning products from illegal settlements, and diplomatic pressure, which include downgrading diplomatic ties, dispelling representatives, and suspending Israel from international organizations like the UN General Assembly. Next slide, please. So to take concrete actions for BDS, we must be strategic. We cannot boycott every single brand at once because that is unsustainable. So next slide, please. Instead, we take concrete actions using our 4 criteria to pick our targets. First, the level of complicity. We look at those who are most directly involved in the crimes, such as the companies arming the Israeli military. Intersectionality, we target those that are being fought by other movements, such as Chevron for climate activists. Media appeal, we choose brands that people recognize, which help us educate the public, and potential for success. So we pick campaigns where we have a reasonable chance of forcing the target to change its behavior. So here you can see that BDS has a list of priority targets, such as Chevron and HP, and we have pressure targets as well as organic boycotts that are officially supported by the BDS movement. Next slide, please. So as we mentioned earlier, Thailand is complicit in the Israeli occupation of Palestine. And these complicities include military ties, exploitation of Thai workers, agricultural and trade, infrastructure, and energy and resource exploitation. This last point is especially relevant to our priority target in Chevron. Next slide, please. So we'd like to briefly introduce our campaign, apartheid-free zones, or the Punti for Palestine, which in Thai means place for Palestine. So apartheid-free zones are local spaces that pledge to be complicit-free. This means that we boycott products and companies that profit from the Israeli occupation of Palestine and ensure that our local spaces reflect our values. Next slide, please. So AFCs can be social and community spaces, cultural spaces, unions, local businesses, academic institutions, and even local government units. Next slide, please. You can sign up to be an AFC here. You can also go to our website to learn more about our campaign. Next slide, please. Here's a QR code to our website. Please feel free to approach me with further questions. I know we are running out of time, so we have a lot of information on our website, and we hope to keep in touch and to organize together for a free Palestine.
Thank you very much, Ari, for your presentation and for highlighting the pathway towards solidarity and civic action. Ladies and gentlemen, as we now approach the conclusion of today's symposium, I would like to invite PSC Thailand's Chief Advisor, Professor Lieutenant General Dr. Somchai Virunapon, to deliver the closing remark. Please welcome Dr. Somchai.
เนื่องจากค่าปรับมันแพงมากนะครับเกิน1 นาทีคือ10,000เพราะงั้นผมจะปิดอย่างบรีฟในฐานะตัวแทนของผู้จัดขอขอบคุณผู้ที่มาร่วมบรรยายโดยเฉพาะเราได้การบรรยายที่มีคุณค่าสูงสุดคือท่านศาสตราจารย์อิหลานปะเป้นะครับข ขอบคุณท่านดร.อาทิตย์ขอบคุณหน่วยงาน BDS และก็มุสลิมอิมรอนนะครับก็ขอบคุณทุกท่านที่เสียสละเวลาและเราคงไม่หยุดแค่นี้ผมขอจบด้วยสโลแกนที่เราจะพูดกันต่อไปและไม่ยอมให้ลืมเลือนนั่นก็คือว่า from the river to the sea Palestine will be free ขอปิดรายการครับขอบคุณ
Ladies and gentlemen, and that concludes our symposium today on Nakba Day 2026. Thank you very much for joining us and have a safe journey home.